Chapter 1191. Early that morning, a black limousine slowly stopped in front of Boyi building. As usual, the single female employees of the company would wander in front of Tang Yu intentionally or unintentionally because the president was single. However, today was different. The president pulled Pei Chichi out of the car. Pei Chichi was wearing a white t-shirt and black cropped pants. Her long hair was tied up in a bun, and it was impossible to tell that she was 25 or 26 years old. She got out of the car and said something with a frown. Their wise and mighty CEO smiled dotingly and bent down to carry Xiaoshen out of the car. Xiaoshen was wearing a garden dress with small floral patterns and looked especially cute. Tang Yu held his young wife in one hand and Xiaoshen in the other. That scene was super pink. The unmarried women of Boyi building covered their faces with envy. Pei Chichi carried a small bag and followed behind Tang Yu like a little girl. Don't you think that President Pei hasn't changed at all since he worked at Shengyuan? One of the employees whispered. Another looked at the family of three and then smiled. President Pei has the president's special maintenance. Do you have it? Just looking at the president's 2-meter-long legs made her look 5 years younger. The group of people joked for a while and did not dare to say anything else. After all, he was the president. Who dared to say more? On the other side, Pei Chichi followed Tang Yu to his exclusive elevator. She looked at him. Actually, Xiaoshen and I are fine at home. She quite liked the life of a riceworm now, and she really felt that he was a little too careful. She had an accident on the mountain, but it did not mean that she had to follow him every day like an object. He was not afraid of being laughed at, but she felt tired. However, Pei Chichi was still too naive. Of course, Tang Yu had the ability to protect her. He did this only because it was fun and interesting. Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at her. After a while, he chuckled. I'll follow you for now. Pei Chichi pouted. I'm telling you, I don't want to be a secretary. Then what do you want to do? Tang Yu chuckled. Pei Chichi snorted. Anyway, it's not love. Tang Yu glanced at Xiaoshen, then looked at Pei Chichi, and held his forehead helplessly. His Chichi was getting more and more daring. However, Tang Yu didn't correct her in front of Xiaoshen. Instead, he planned to teach Pei Xiaoqi a lesson at home. The elevator door opened, and Xiao Ran was standing outside. Xiao Ran smiled. President, Chichi. Pei Chichi greeted Xiao Ran with a smile. She clenched her fist and placed it on the back of Tang Yu's waist. She gritted her teeth and said softly, You said Xiao Ran applied for leave. I said it's possible. Tang Yu held her little hand and didn't let her act wildly. Then, he signaled Xiao Ran to take Xiaoshen away with him. Xiao Ran smiled and took Xiaoshen away. Xiaoshen cried out, expressing her dissatisfaction, but she was still tricked away by the delicious food. The door of the president's office was closed. Pei Chi leaned against the door, looking a little rascal. Tang Yu, you said that Meng Qingcheng wanted to propose to Xiao Ran and that their marriage was fake. Now, Xiao Ran was working here. Chapter 1192. Tang Yu said with a smile, Chichi, are you looking forward to getting married again? She was too ashamed to get married again. Pei Chichi turned her face away and bit his palm angrily. He chuckled and let her fool around. When she was done, he said softly, I don't mind proposing again. Pei Chichi looked up at his serious face. After a while, she said softly, Actually, you don't need to. They didn't need to express themselves in words. Just when she thought that, Tang Yu nodded in agreement. That's true. Sex only needs to be done. He nibbled her little ear and teased her. Didn't you say that before? Huh? Pei Chichi blushed and looked at him. I didn't mean that. Then I'd rather misinterpret it. He smiled and finally let go of her. Finally, he didn't do anything to her behind the door. Only then did Pei Chichi heave a sigh of relief. Her gaze fell on a pink desk beside his desk, and her hair stood on end. Why is my desk like this? She waved her little fist. Tang Yu laughed and asked her in reply, You don't want to be a secretary. Then, you can only be a child. Tang Yu, you're a pervert. Pei Chichi blushed. Tang Yu chuckled and held her little body. Doesn't Chichi like me being a pervert the most? He pressed her down on the little pink desk. She leaned back and he whispered shamelessly into her ear, "Don't you like it when I'm perverted in bed with you? That's in bed, not in the office." She refused to sit in front of such a shameful little desk. Tang Yu reached out and touched his chin. "Well, I'll consider Mrs. Tang's suggestion." Saying that, he carried her to the lounge, like a princess carry. Pei Chichi punched him and screamed, "Tang Yu, you unscrupulous businessman. You're proclaiming why in the daytime. Mrs. Tang, have you been thinking about this?" He threw her onto the bed and propped himself up with both hands to look down at her. He also felt that he was a little crazy. Even messing around with her like this made his heart overjoyed. He raised his hand to look at his watch. "I have an important meeting at 9:30. There are still 10 minutes left. Don't even think about it." Pei Chichi's little hand grabbed his collar. Her face was red, but her voice was soft. She knew that if he wanted to do something, she couldn't stop him at all, so she could only be soft. Tang Yu smiled and kissed her. "We'll continue tonight." He got up nimbly, tidied himself up, and winked at her. "And Chichi, that desk is Xiaoxin's. You think too much." Pei Chichi pursed her lips and stared at him. He walked out happily. When he went to the meeting, he didn't see Xiao Ran and Meng Qingcheng. There wasn't even anyone to send or receive documents. In the end, Tang Yu decisively called his little girl over to do some work. He had a bad taste, especially when he saw her sitting next to him with a grievance. He couldn't memorize it, so he decided to draw a picture of a tortoise. He had an indescribable softness, as if the whole world had softened. Only his Chichi could give him this kind of feeling, and Meng Qingcheng, who was supposed to be in the meeting, blocked Xiao Ran in the small pantry. He frowned and looked at her. "Xiao Ran, I think I've made it very clear. Why did you go back for the blind date yesterday?" Chapter 1193. Xiao Ran leaned against the wall and looked at the door. Someone could come in at any time. Meng Qingcheng noticed her gaze and closed the door casually. The sound was not soft, at least the staff outside saw that Secretary Xiao and Assistant Meng were locked in the pantry together. As for what they were doing inside, everyone was giggling. It was nothing more than men and women. Xiao Ran looked at the closed door and was a little annoyed. "Meng Qingcheng, what does my blind date have to do with you? Open the door." Not only did he not open the door, but he took a step forward and stuck himself between her body, not giving her a chance to escape. "What does it have to do with me?" He lowered his head, searching for her lips to kiss, but Xiao Ran suddenly turned her head away. Meng Qingcheng was not angry, but he leaned closer and rubbed the tip of his nose against hers. He murmured, Ran, that's not what you said when we were having sex." She suddenly raised her head and her chin hit his nose. Meng Qingcheng groaned, but he was magnanimous and did not argue with her. He reached out and held her chin. His voice was very soft. "At that time, you told me that you wouldn't go on blind dates anymore." Xiao Ran had always been calm and had never panicked like this before. Even when they had sex in her ward that day, she was not as cute as she was now. Look at how her eyes were wide open, like a little rabbit's. How cute. Meng Qingcheng never knew that Xiao Ran had such a childish side to her. Previously, it was only because she was injured on the mountain and almost got hit in the head by a rock. At that time, his blood was surging, and there was a thought in his heart that he didn't want to lose her. He was not an indecisive man. So that day in her ward, when her injury was not serious, she told him that she wanted to go on a blind date for the 5th time. She said that her mother liked this man, and Meng Qingcheng pressed her on the hospital bed and slept with her. She was much calmer that day than she was today. Even if it was her first time. That day, Meng Qingcheng did not expect that it would be Xiao Ran's first time. After all, she was not young. She was in her 20s. Moreover, she had gone on a few blind dates. Some of them were indifferent. Yet, it was her first time. Although he didn't care, from that moment until now, his heart was still agitated. An indescribable ecstasy. It turned out that if you liked someone, you would care. At that time, he finally understood why Tang Yu felt that way when he married Pei Chichi a few years ago, and why he fell in love with her. At this moment, as he looked at Xiao Ran, his heart softened. The place where only Tang Xin was had been quietly captured. Although Xiao Ran was mature, it did not mean that she was not weak. In private, when he wanted her, her expression was very alluring. At this moment, she was even more frightened, like a child. He could not bear to let go. Xiao Ran wanted to turn her face away, but he held her hand and refused to let go. Xiao Ran bit her lips and glared at him. Then, she laughed and raised her chin. She said provocatively, "Meng Qingcheng, do you think that the words you say on the bed can be trusted?" Meng Qingcheng's expression was a little strange. He seemed to be angered by her, but he was not that angry. His fingers gently caressed her beautiful face. His voice was deep and slow. "Ran Ran, do you think that the words you say on the wall can be trusted?" Chapter 1194. Meng Qingcheng moved closer and his voice was a little hoarse. "Ran Ran, it's only right to be shameless to your wife." She recalled what he had done to her that day. It seemed that the place where she had endured him was also faintly heating up. She bit her lips. "Who's your wife? Ran Ran, what do you think?" He moved closer again. Xiao Ran couldn't take it anymore and her eyes were watery. Meng Qingcheng chuckled and lowered his head to kiss her lips. In the beginning, Xiao Ran wasn't willing because she wouldn't decide to be with him just because of the ridiculous night they spent together. She waited for him for so long until her heart gave up and she waited for him to reject her. She also had her own pride and self-esteem. But no matter how she tried to hide, he had a way to cling on to her. Xiao Ran really couldn't hide anymore and went to bite him. Meng Qingcheng chuckled softly and endured the pain to kiss her deeply. Compared to his proficiency, Xiao Ran was actually inexperienced. She could only swallow and breathe along with his fierce kisses, succumbing to his superb technique over and over again. However, Meng Qingcheng had forgotten one thing. The better his skills were, the more experienced he was in love. After the kiss, Xiao Ran cried. She slapped Meng Qingcheng and then turned her face to the side and didn't make a sound. She just cried. What did he take her for? In such a place, he played with her wantonly. What's wrong? You were fine just now. His voice was a little hoarse and there was a hint of longing that hadn't dissipated. Xiao Ran turned her head and looked at him. Meng Qingcheng, I can't afford to play those games of yours. If you don't love me, don't provoke me. Meng Qingcheng looked at her tears and touched them gently with his fingers, gently wiping away those tears for her. Ran Ran, how do you know that I won't love you? She looked at him blankly. He told her that he loved her. I'm sure that I like you very much right now, and the possibility of this developing into love is 100%. His fingers caressed her little face gently. Then, he said in a low voice, do you still want me to leave? Xiao Ran kicked him a little stubbornly. Go away. Meng Qingcheng ignored her wishes and kissed the corner of her mouth. He said with a smile, Ran Ran, are you willing to do that? How could I not? She glared at him hatefully, but her eyes were watery, indescribably beautiful. Meng Qingcheng immediately sealed her little mouth and kissed her for a while before whispering, Ran Ran, but I can't bear to. Perhaps there would always be a place in his heart for Tang Xin that could never be erased, but Xiao Ran would always be the most important person to him. It was not much of a thrilling emotion, but she had seeped into his heart in such a way that he was not aware of it. Until one day, when he was driving past a cafe, he sat in the car smoking and saw Xiao Ran and a young man sitting opposite each other. There was an elder on each side, and it was obvious that they were going on a blind date. He was a little absent-minded at that time, and the cigarette almost burned his fingers. Only then did he remember that she had said that she was going on a blind date. He gave her his blessing and said that he wished her success. But now that he saw it, he drove the car to the parking lot outside the cafe and parked it. He sat in the car and looked in her direction, watching her struggling to deal with the man. In Meng Qingcheng's eyes, the man was too young and inexperienced, and he was not worthy of Xiao Ran. Chapter 1195. Someone like Meng Qingcheng could tell the age difference between the two parties. The man was about 25 or 26 years old. Although he was clean, He was definitely not a respectable person. To put it bluntly, his family conditions were average. If he wanted to find a woman, he could save a lot of years of hard work. He also disliked the woman's age and speculated whether the woman had a rich love history and would regret marrying her. Meng Qingcheng sat in the car and watched quietly until the man's elder forced a smile and left with Xiaoran's mother. They probably agreed to look around first. Meng Qingcheng took a long drag on his cigarette. A girl like Xiaoran was also picky. He felt indescribably sad. No matter what, they were still friends. This sadness reached its climax when he stood behind her in the cafe. He heard the young man ask her directly if she was a virgin. Meng Qingcheng punched the man who overestimated himself, then pulled Xiaoran and left. He said to her, "Find a better man than me. Otherwise, I won't let you marry me." Xiaoran cried, however, she still went on blind dates. He did not ruin it again. Instead, he watched silently from the outside. He watched her fail again and again until one day, she went on a date with someone else, but it only happened once or twice. Meng Qingcheng followed her, and as time passed, he lost his heart. However, she became colder and colder to him. She was just like a normal colleague. He knew that he was the one who lost Xiaoran. She used to stand behind him for so many years, but he never turned around. After she failed 4 blind dates, he decided to get her back. He was a man of action. When she sprained her ankle and was probably unable to resist, he took her and kissed her. Then, he took off her hospital gown in the ward. When he thought about it, he was a little beastly. However, he did not regret it. At least she got happiness and satisfaction twice. It was her first time, but she was a mature woman. They were quite compatible in this aspect. It was indescribable. Meng Qingcheng endured it for a few days. He wanted to have her again. Ran, come home with me tonight. He nibbled on her neck and gently coaxed her. Xiaoran did not make a sound. He just shed tears. Meng Qingcheng's lips moved upwards and kissed her lightly. His voice was even more seductive. "Shall we go to your place then?" Xiaoran kicked him. Pervert. She didn't know where she got the strength from, but she pushed him away and ran out. Meng Qingcheng was still standing there with his hands in his pockets, laughing in a low voice as he walked out leisurely. He was in no hurry. Her defenses were weak and she couldn't run away at all. Most importantly, he could feel that she wanted him too. Didn't they say that if a man wanted to enter a woman's heart, he must first go through her, that thing? When Xiaoran ran into the meeting room, it was very abrupt. She completely forgot that her hair was messy, her lipstick was eaten, and her lips were slightly swollen. Her appearance was really suspicious. In particular, after she pushed the door open for a minute, Special Assistant Meng also slowly followed her. It made her even more suspicious. Pei Chichi's eyes widened and she immediately moved to make way for Xiaoran. Chapter 1196. Other than the boss, no one else could be so righteous even though he was using his official position for personal gain. Meng Qingcheng smiled and said, "Thank you, CEO." After that, he dragged Xiaoran away in broad daylight. Tang Yu looked at the stunned executives in the room and smiled. "Let's continue the meeting." He knocked on the dazed Pei Chichi again. "Secretary Pei, take notes. Don't keep drawing tortoises." There was a burst of laughter. Pei Chichi looked up at him with an indescribable expression. However, Tang Yu was in a good mood. He looked at her and said in a light voice, "Focus." The executives all vomited blood. The Qing dynasty was gone. Boyi had become a place for the CEO to talk about love. So shameful. So shameful. Forget the shame. Pei Chichi looked at Tang Yu with a strange look in her eyes. Tang Yu could still calmly continue the meeting. As the days passed, the executives of Boyi expressed that they had been fed so much dog food by their big boss that their salary was nothing. The company's annual magazine even boldly used a title, "So, this is the kind of CEO you are." The article listed the classic sentences that Tang Yu used to spoil his wife. Every sentence made people feel that spring had come and they should start a relationship. However, only Pei Chichi would feel that spring was actually quite hard. Spring represented sowing. In the middle of summer, Meng Qingcheng finally settled the matter with Xiao Ran's mother. It only took a month for them to get engaged and married. In Meng Qingcheng's words, a long night is fraught with dreams. Old Khan and Pei Huan's son, Khan Xing, finally changed his name to Khan Yu. Lin Jinrong got married, and it was said that Mrs. Lin and Pei Chichi looked similar. As for the details, Pei Chichi didn't take a closer look, nor did she want to. She believed that Jinrong wouldn't. Everything was just a coincidence. On the way back from the wedding, Tang Yu and Pei Chichi sat together in the back seat. Tang Yu was a little drunk. He leaned his head back and loosened his tie, but he still felt a little hot. He grabbed her hand, his voice a little hoarse. "Chichi, unbutton my shirt." Pei Chichi nodded obediently and leaned into his arms to unbutton his shirt. She was wearing a blue evening gown tonight and was lying in his arms like a little elf. Just by looking at her, Tang Yu felt a little hot. He reached out and caressed her little face. "Chichi, what do you think about tonight? What thoughts can I have?" She pouted and her hands were not idle. "Mr. Tang, you can tell me your thoughts first." He closed his eyes and chuckled lowly. He caressed her little face. "What else could I think? I just want to know how Mrs. Tang feels about your first love getting married." Pei Chichi bit his lips angrily. "It's not the first time." When she said that, he suddenly recalled a distant memory. That time, when Jinrong and Pei Huan got married, he and Chichi had just gotten together. But that time, it was purely a business relationship. It seemed like that night, when he wanted her for the second time, in the car, he ignited a fire. Tang Yu's body heated up as he thought about it. He looked at her little face without batting an eyelid. He chuckled. "No matter what, it's only Jinrong's second time. Pei Chichi, how many times have you been married?" Pei Chichi was about to explode. "Tang Yu, do you dislike me?" "Of course not." He held her in his arms and smiled. "I'm just afraid that you'll have a comparison." Chapter 1197. She sat in his arms and squeezed his neck. "Tang Yu, are you bringing up the past?" His aura was alluring. He smiled. "What's there to bring up the past?" He kissed her. "Chichi, didn't you say you were going to unbutton your shirt?" He reached out and patted her little hand to express his displeasure. Pei Chichi nodded and obediently lay in his arms. She reached out and unbuttoned 2 buttons for him. She was also very considerate as she took off his coat and tie. Tang Yu was slightly tipsy. He held her with one arm and his eyes were slightly closed, as if he was asleep. Pei Chichi had also drunk a little. She looked at Tang Yu and placed her little hand on his shoulder. At this moment, it was as if they had returned to their first time. He was drunk and she had barged into his room. At this moment, she was still moved as she looked at him. His handsome face could always attract her. She couldn't help but kiss his lips lightly and murmur, "Tang Yu, have I ever said that I love you?" His dark eyes slowly opened and he looked at her silently. After a long time, he chuckled. "Chichi, I should be the one saying that." He pressed her little head into his arms and pressed it gently. It was an indescribable gentleness. Pei Chichi obediently stuck to him and let him caress her like a little animal. This moment was especially warm because she knew that once they returned to the rose garden, it wouldn't be like this anymore. Tang Yu was naturally aware of her little thoughts. He only chuckled and didn't say anything. Sure enough, when they got home, he dismissed the servants and carried her upstairs. Pei Chichi's little hand was wrapped around his neck. She pouted her little mouth and actually looked a little displeased. Tang Yu smiled and kissed her lips. He said in a low voice, "Chichi, I went for a recovery surgery a few days ago." She let out a gasp and hugged his neck tightly. Her face was also close to his. "Those times were because of the surgery?" "Which times?" His voice was a little bewitching. "I used my fingers." His voice became low and hoarse. "Did I satisfy you a few times?" Pei Chichi bit his neck and looked at him. "Tang Yu, you're shameless." He chuckled softly and had already carried her to the sunroom on the top floor. At this time, through the transparent glass, they could see the starry sky. In the sunroom, there was a king-sized bed, surrounded by black roses. It was obvious that it had been meticulously decorated. Pei Chichi's little hand tugged at his tie. She bit her lips and lowered her long eyelashes, trying to hold back her laughter. Is this to celebrate your recovery of a man? Isn't it a little too grand? She finally couldn't help it. She smiled very sweetly and even took a small bite of him. Tang Yu threw her on the bed. Her black hair spread out, and her light blue dress drew a beautiful arc in the air. Then it rolled up, revealing a small part of her tender calf. Then he turned over and pressed his body against hers. He took a black rose with one hand and put it at the tip of her nose. His voice was low and husky. Mrs. Tang, how do you want to do the examination? Pei Chichi looked at him and put her little hand on the button of his shirt. She closed her eyes and said, we have a lot of time. Yes, we have a lifetime. Tang Yu smiled and finally kissed her little mouth. It was just like the first time they met. They didn't know each other, but their bodies were already attracted. She was made for him by God, and they were so compatible. Chichi, I love you. Always, always. Mrs. Tang, we will always grow old, but even if you are old and wrinkled, you will still be the little princess in my heart. The stars and the moon are proof. Chapter 1198. To many women, Qin Anlan was a beautiful catastrophe. But to Yi Liangqiu, Qin Anlan used to be her only source of warmth. That year, she was 19 years old. At King Entertainment headquarters, Yi Liangqiu followed behind Kaim, looking uneasy. She bit her beautiful lips tightly. She knew what she was going to face in a moment. It was the most unbearable thing in her life. But she had no choice. She needed money, and more than anything, she needed someone to save Yizun. As she was feeling extremely uneasy, Kaim said calmly as he walked, "Don't worry, President Qin is just looking for something new. It's hard to say if he'll look for you again in the future. 500,000 for one session, as usual. Besides, President Qin doesn't have any bad hobbies. Don't worry, it'll only take a while. Besides, President Qin isn't bad-looking." Yi Liangqiu knew what Kaim meant. He was saying that she didn't lose out on this matter. As they spoke, they had already reached Qin Anlan's office. Kaim knocked on the door. A very calm voice came from inside, "Come in." Kaim led Yi Liangqiu in. As he opened the door, he reminded her in a low voice, "Remember, President Qin likes obedient women. When the time comes, your waist will be soft. If President Qin is happy, his future will be limitless." When Yi Liangqiu entered, she broke out in a cold sweat. But her shoulder was bumped, and the force was a little barbaric. She looked up and saw Mo Xiaoqi, who the company had been promoting. She was the Asian queen who had been in the limelight for the past 2 years. Behind Mo Xiaoqi was her manager, Shirley. Both master and servant had their noses in the air. Before they left, they only gave Yi Liangqiu a disdainful glance. Mo Xiaoqi's voice was a little mocking. "Another one who wants to climb up the ladder with her looks. She's overestimating herself." Yi Liangqiu knew that Mo Xiaoqi had a rather deep background. She was a member of Qin Anlan's harem in the past. She pursed her lips and did not make a sound. Mo Xiaoqi's eyes were a little resentful, but she didn't dare to be rash in front of Qin Anlan, so she quickly left. The door closed again. In the large office, Qin Anlan stood in front of the wine cabinet and poured himself a glass of red wine. He took 2 light sips before turning around to look at Kaim and Yi Liangqiu. Qin Anlan's gaze fell on her face for a few seconds before he looked at Kaim and said, "Temporarily stop Mo Xiaoqi's work." Kaim nodded. He knew that President Qin must be unhappy with Mo Xiaoqi's behavior in front of President Qin. Thinking about how Mo Xiaoqi had been popular for 2 years, she really thought that she was the big sister of King Entertainment and President Qin's wife. In reality, no matter which female artist King Entertainment wanted to promote, President Qin wouldn't touch her. At the same time, he would restrict her private life and forbid any inappropriate relationships. But marriage was allowed. Kaim quickly left as well, leaving Yi Liangqiu to face Qin Anlan alone. The atmosphere suddenly became subtle. His gaze returned to her. Yi Liangqiu was very tall, about 172 centimeters. She was slender and tall, but for a female artist, she seemed to lack some gentleness and was a little too heroic. But it was undeniable that she was beautiful, similar to Lin Qingxia's beauty. Qin Anlan frowned in that instant. He actually instinctively resisted having any kind of relationship with her. But he still ordered calmly, "Go to the lounge." Yi Liangqiu placed her fingers on her skirt. She tried her best to appear more obedient, but her feet just wouldn't move. She was afraid. Chapter 1199. Qin Anlan had read many people. Looking at her expression, he said in a husky voice, "First time?" Yi Liangqiu's fingers clutched the hem of her dress. She pursed her lips tightly and nodded after a while. He then looked at her carefully. She was tall and skinny. She didn't have any makeup on, but her pores were clear and she was surprisingly young. However, King Entertainment never lacked young girls. What they lacked were talented girls. He had never seen this Yi Liangqiu before. She must have just entered the company. Qin Anlan took out a cigarette from his pocket, lowered his head, and took a puff. He didn't speak, so she stood there motionlessly. His dark eyes were locked on her little face, then her slender arms, and the straight legs under her knee-length skirt. He was surprised to find that her body was shockingly well proportioned. He seemed a little confused and hesitant, but in the end, he said lightly, "Go in and wait for me." Yi Liangqiu looked up at him hurriedly. In her eyes, he saw the fear that a 19-year-old girl should have. His voice unconsciously became gentler. "Go take a shower. I'll come in after a game." As he said that, he put down the wine glass in his hand and walked to the side of the table with the cigarette in his hand, ignoring her. Yi Liangqiu waited quietly for 2 seconds. After confirming that he was really patient, she walked to his lounge. Qin Anlan's office was his harem. She had heard people say this before, but she had never imagined that she would one day walk in here, lie down, and allow him to do that kind of thing to her as he pleased. She went to take a bath, changed into his bathrobe, and then lay flat on the exaggeratedly large bed, like a concubine in ancient times who was paying tribute to him in bed. She looked up at the chandelier above her head and closed her eyes in discomfort. Her hand gripped her phone tightly. She knew that she was courting death. If she angered Qin Anlan, she would never be able to survive in this industry again. But she had no other choice. She had to save Yi Zun. Finally, she heard the noise outside softening. She got off the bed and hid her phone behind the cabinet in front of her. She adjusted the angle of the phone so that it was aimed at the bed. When she lay down again in a panic, Qin Anlan came in. He closed the door, glanced at her, and then walked into the bathroom without saying a word. Yi Liangqiu closed his eyes and heard the sound of running water in the bathroom. He showered very quickly and came out in about 5 minutes. Qin Anlan only had a towel wrapped around his waist. When he walked out, his body was still slightly damp and cold. He looked at the little girl lying on the bed. She was lying there nervously with her eyes tightly closed. He actually laughed silently, feeling that it was rare and joyful. This kind of joy was something that he had never experienced even when he was in bed with a woman. Nervous. He sat beside her, his fingers gently stroking her arm. The places where he touched had goosebumps. No. Her voice trembled. Qin Anlan laughed. His long and narrow eyes were relaxed. "You're still denying it. It's like you're being tortured." He didn't tell her that this was the first time he had let a woman into his lounge. He had never pampered a woman here before, and he had never coaxed a girl like this. Coaxing a girl was something that happened a long time ago. Yi Liangqiu opened her eyes and slowly sat up. Her long hair was spread out, and she looked more feminine than before. Chapter 1200. As if to prove it, she pressed her lips against his and kissed the corner of his mouth hurriedly. It was messy, but strangely enough, it aroused his desire. He pressed down on her shoulders and brought her into his arms. With a gentle push of his hand, she appeared before him, without any hindrance. Only then did he realize how beautiful the girl in his arms was. She had no extra flesh and blood. Although she was thin, she definitely had what she should have. He hadn't seen this kind of beauty in a long time, so beautiful that it made him waver again. Should he let go of her? But the towel around his waist was pulled away, and then Yu Wang dominated his thoughts. He had taken her in that bed. He towered over her and looked at her pained expression. Her expression was so beautiful, it was like a long scene in a movie. Qin Anlan admitted that he was a little distracted. He slept with women to relax. He took charge of King Entertainment at the age of 22 and brought King Entertainment to unprecedented heights in 2 years. He had also been under pressure that ordinary people couldn't bear. Women were just his concoction. But now, he was distracted when he was in bed with a woman. He was thinking about work, thinking about how beautiful the woman beneath him would be in a movie. He looked at her carefully and used all kinds of methods to torture her, making her look different. Every side made him ecstatic. He didn't notice that he was so engrossed that at the last moment, he didn't realize, he gave it all to her. And he didn't rest at all. It was as if he was on steroids. He kept searching for it on her body. Yi Liangqiu's first time was worse than death. Pain. It was continuous pain. He gave her too much. She couldn't bear it at all. She could only keep climbing up and down with him. She didn't know that in his eyes, she was already a beauty that could destroy a city. Until he suddenly woke up and suddenly left her, everything had already happened. His breathing was chaotic, but his dark eyes had already calmed down. He covered her body with the blanket and calmed down. Then he said quietly, "In the future, don't give your body to anyone, not even once." Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes and curled up at the head of the bed. After a long time, she looked up. "Do you still want me?" "No." He reached out and stroked her red lips. "You belong on the big screen." As Qin Anlan spoke, he walked into the bathroom and washed himself. He was too engrossed just now and forgot that he did not have any protective measures. As for the 19-year-old Yi Liangqiu, she was even more ignorant of the ways of the world. She had no idea that there was such a thing as a morning-after drug. When Qin Anlan came out, she had already put on her clothes and followed him outside. He wrote her a check for 500,000. She took it silently. Qin Anlan's gaze fell on her little face for a long time before he pressed the intercom. "Kaim, come in for a moment." Kaim was a young man in his late 20s. He had a high status in King Entertainment. There were many people who wanted to curry favor with President Qin through him. However, Kaim had never had any scandals. It was said that he was edgy. After a while, Kaim came over. He was a little surprised to see Yi Liangqiu. Qin Anlan smoked calmly. "Hand her over to Ying Jie to train. Arrange a role for her in 3 months." He thought for a moment and continued, "Let her come and see me once a week." Chapter 1201. Yi Liangqiu had only been in King Entertainment for half a year and was only an intern. She didn't even have a role with 3 lines. Wasn't it inappropriate for Ying Jie to take care of such a person? Kaim asked what he was thinking, but Qin Anlan only glanced at him indifferently. "You're getting better and better at your job." Kaim didn't dare to say anything else, but he didn't agree in his heart. President Qin wasn't someone who couldn't distinguish between public and private matters. Even if this girl had served President Qin before, he couldn't break the rules. Moreover, Ying Jie might not be willing to take her. Regardless, Kaim still brought Yi Liangqiu to Ying Jie. Ying Jie was 35 or 36 years old and had taken care of 4 or 5 international celebrities. It could be said that Ying Jie was a wind vane. Whoever King Entertainment wanted to promote, they usually got Ying Jie to take care of. Those who could be taken care of by Ying Jie all the time were kings, queens, and international superstars. Just like Mo Xiaoqi, Ying Jie had taken care of her for half a year and then stopped. Although Mo Xiaoqi was known as Asia's little queen, in Ying Jie's eyes, she wouldn't be popular for long. She only knew how to create hype and not act. Kaim brought Yi Liangqiu to Ying Jie. Ying Jie was training the newcomers of King Entertainment. This batch of newcomers, including Yi Liangqiu, had a total of 20 people. They were all top-notch in terms of appearance. However, the difference was that Yi Liangqiu was the only one who had been summoned by President Qin. Because of this, Ying Jie didn't like her very much. Mo Xiaoqi was the same back then. Because she had a relationship with President Qin once, she was all kinds of arrogant and didn't take Ying Jie seriously. Ying Jie took care of her for half a year and then stopped taking care of her. Of course, she also watched coldly as Mo Xiaoqi ran into a wall with President Qin. The young girl was too naive. Did she think that just because she slept with a man like President Qin, she had met her true love? President Qin had too many true loves. Ying Jie looked at Yi Liangqiu and pursed her lips sternly. Go to training first. Yi Liangqiu nodded. In fact, her leg was in great pain. Walking was already difficult for her. If she were to practice those splits now, it would kill her. However, she did not resist. She walked into the group of 20 students and endured the great pain to practice those movements. Ying Jie silently watched for a few seconds, then walked to the door with Kaim. Kaim respected Ying Jie a lot. In King Entertainment, no one would disrespect Ying Jie because President Qin thought highly of Ying Jie. The achievements of the artists Ying Jie groomed always met President Qin's expectations. What's going on? President Qin has to support every girl he's slept with. I don't want to wait on these little devils. Ying Jie frowned and looked at Kaim. Kaim quickly lit a cigarette for Ying Jie and handed it to her. I'm puzzled too. President Qin is actually just like that when it comes to women. He's not that obsessed. Ying Jie took a puff and scolded him with a smile. You're just speaking up for your boss. With that said, she turned around and looked at Yi Liangqiu. The little girl could actually take hardships. She forcefully endured the training. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Seeing that her expression had relaxed, Kaim took the opportunity to say, how is it? She can take hardships, right? What's the big deal about being able to take hardships in this industry? Ying Jie glanced at him. Why do you think President Qin likes her so much? Or was there something special about her? Kaim smiled bitterly. How would I know? If I knew, I would have told Ying Jie, wouldn't I? Ying Jie smiled and did not say anything. Since she didn't say anything, Kaim didn't leave and stayed obediently. Chapter 1202. Everyone in the company knew how strict Ying Jie was, so she was in charge of all the new students. Those who couldn't take it would be fired immediately. King Entertainment didn't want popular young stars or starlets. After Ying Jie went in, she paid special attention to Yi Liangqiu. Judging from the girl's expression, it was her first time today. She knew President Qin a little. He was much more capable than ordinary people in certain aspects, so he definitely wouldn't let this girl have it easy. However, although Sister Ying thought about it, her request was still the same as before. Therefore, when they were dismissed in the afternoon, Yi Liangqiu felt that every bone in his body was no longer in place. Ying Jie looked at her indifferently and said, Go back first. I don't take people with me easily. This was no different from a rejection. Kaim, who had been waiting for a long time, laughed bitterly. Actually, he had been watching coldly from the side just now. Yi Liangqiu was a virgin and she had only been pampered by President Qin. Ying Jie was really ruthless. She actually wanted her to do those things and didn't make an exception at all. Now, she didn't soften at all. He wanted to speak up for Yi Liangqiu, but he knew Ying Jie's temper. The more you pleaded, the more she wouldn't soften. Kaim whispered to Yi Liangqiu, bear with it. No one can disobey what President Qin wants to do. Yi Liangqiu was a little surprised and looked at Kaim with sweat all over her face. I'll go back first, Ying Jie, Kaim said softly. Think about it. Just treat it as me. Ying Jie looked at him and then at Yi Liangqiu. She smiled and said, Why? Do you feel sorry for me? I've never seen you feel sorry for anyone in the company all these years. Kaim laughed dryly and didn't say anything else. He went straight to the president's office. Qin Anlan was reading a document. When he heard the door open, he asked lightly, How is it? Qin Anlan was very sure that Kaim had been gone for so long that there must have been some twists and turns. Kaim hesitated for a moment. I think President Qin should talk to Ying Jie in person. Qin Anlan put down the document in his hand and looked at Kaim. She doesn't agree. Kaim nodded. I think it's because of what happened to Mo Xiaoqi that Ying Jie isn't willing to work with President Qin. Qin Anlan smoked a cigarette. I asked her to bring Yi Liangqiu along, Not because I wanted her. In fact, Qin Anlan didn't tell her that he and Yi Liangqiu didn't feel the same way at that time because he was paying attention to her feelings. On the contrary, he didn't care about it at all. It was an intimate experience that was beyond the senses. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but it left a deep impression on him. It was so deep that Qin Anlan would remember it for many years to come. It was so deep that he would have sex with many women later on, but none of them could compare to this. However, he was more willing to turn her into a unique work of art. She would become the top female star in the entertainment industry in the future. He had high hopes for her and only Ying Jie could bring her out. Qin Anlan changed the topic. No need. If she can't even handle Ying Jie, how can she survive in the complicated entertainment industry? She would have died halfway before she could become a superstar. Kaim nodded. Just then, Qin Anlan put out his cigarette and said calmly, "Get someone to change the sheets in the lounge." Kaim went to do it. Of course, she found out that President Qin wanted the young lady's first time. Chapter 1203. On the other side, Yi Liangqiu was carrying her little backpack and getting ready to get off work. The basic salary of an intern at King Entertainment wasn't high, 3,500. But if she was chosen to be a backup dancer or something, she would get a stipend of 200 to 300 each time. In a month, she would earn about 5,000 to 6,000. This income was precious to Yi Liangqiu. Her father was a professor who had been honest all his life. He only left her with 3 children and an 80 square meter apartment. If it wasn't for what happened to Yi Zun, she wouldn't have dropped out of school and wouldn't have joined King Entertainment. Thinking of Yi Zun, Yi Liangqiu gripped her phone tightly. Yi Zun's life and death would be decided in this phone. She went to the changing room to change and was about to leave when she bumped into Mo Xiaoqi and her manager who were coming out of the changing room opposite. Mo Xiaoqi saw the hickey on Yi Liangqiu's neck. It was left by Qin Anlan and it stung her eyes. She was indignant. She was now the Asia Queen, but President Qin didn't even look at her in the eye. Instead, he wanted this little girl who hadn't even grown up yet. Mo Xiaoqi sneered and walked towards Yi Liangqiu. Before she reached her, she had already slapped her. Bitch! She didn't have an advantage in height and the slap landed squarely on Yi Liangqiu's chin. Immediately, 5 finger marks appeared. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and looked at Mo Xiaoqi. "Sister Mo, did I offend you in any way?" Mo Xiaoqi smiled coldly. "Just the fact that you climbed into President Qin's bed is enough to offend me. I remember that President Qin doesn't have a girlfriend," Yi Liangqiu said calmly. Her voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. But Mo Xiaoqi interpreted it as a guilty conscience. She was used to doing whatever she wanted in King Entertainment, so she didn't care about anyone, especially the women that President Qin had doted on. She suppressed them both openly and covertly. As time went by, all the newcomers at King Entertainment would suck up to her whenever they saw her. It was just that Yi Liangqiu didn't know how to appreciate favors. Moreover, because of Yi Liangqiu, she had been frozen by the CEO. Although it was only temporary, there was no work for a month and no chance of exposure. Who knew if the fans would forget about her? After her dream of being the wife of King Entertainment's CEO was shattered, Mo Xiaoqi paid special attention to her career. She would never allow anyone to be above her. She was already unhappy that Yi Liangqiu was summoned by President Qin, and President Qin even asked Ying Jie to take her with them. Mo Xiaoqi smelled danger. The newcomer in front of him actually dared to talk back to him. Mo Xiaoqi chuckled and fanned herself with her hand, making sarcastic remarks. "Of course not. I'm just teaching you a lesson. Don't think that you can become famous just because you climbed into President Qin's bed. The entertainment industry isn't that simple." Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips tightly, almost forming a straight line. She said in a low voice, "I've never thought about becoming famous, and I've never thought about standing in anyone's way. But Sister Mo thinks so highly of me. If I don't become famous, I'd be letting you down." Mo Xiaoqi's face flushed and then paled. She glared at Yi Liangqiu. "You dare talk back to me? Do you know who I am?" Mo Xiaoqi. Yi Liangqiu's voice was very soft as she said these 3 words slowly. It had been a long time since Mo Xiaoqi had been looked down upon like this. Who did a newcomer think she was? Chapter 1204. Mo Xiaoqi turned her head and saw Ying Jie appear. She immediately changed her expression and stomped her feet. She was 25 years old, but she was acting like a little girl in front of the 35-year-old Ying Jie. Look, Ying Jie, she's bullying me. The coquettish tone in her voice could make anyone shiver. Ying Jie didn't fall for this. She had been in the entertainment industry for more than a decade and had seen all kinds of people. If Mo Xiaoqi had any prospects, she wouldn't be making things difficult for a newcomer. However, she had witnessed Yi Liangqiu's unyielding character. She had quite a backbone, young lady. Mo Xiaoqi took the opportunity to add insult to injury. Ying Jie, I heard that President Qin asked you to take care of her. Are you sure you want to take care of someone with such mediocre talent? Ying Jie glanced at Yi Liangqiu and said mildly, nobody can say anything about President Qin's arrangements. Her tone was neither warm nor cold. Coupled with the fact that she had used President Qin to pressure her, Mo Xiaoqi didn't dare to say anything else. She knew very well that her status as the Asian queen was given to her by King Entertainment. If the company decided to freeze her one day, she would be dragged down no matter how high she soared. Mo Xiaoqi was indignant, but she could only glare at Yi Liangqiu and leave angrily. Her manager followed her immediately. Ying Jie's gaze fell on Yi Liangqiu's face. After looking at it for a while, she asked, where does your face and body hurt? Her question was filled with deep meaning, but Yi Liangqiu understood. She looked down. My heart hurts the most. She had no choice but to offer her body to Yi Zun because Yi Zun needed money, a huge amount of money. And it wasn't something that could be solved with money. Ying Jie looked at her for a long time before saying, put some ice on it when you go home tonight. If you want to turn red, you have to take good care of your face. It can't be damaged. She paused for a moment. You can't survive in the entertainment industry without a pretty face. Yi Liangqiu nodded. She was not someone who did not know how to read people's expressions. She said softly, thank you, Ying Jie. Ying Jie smiled faintly. Come with me, I'll walk you to the station. Yi Liangqiu was surprised, but Ying Jie was already walking forward. She still couldn't figure out what Ying Jie meant, but she still followed Ying Jie and left. Ying Jie's car was parked on the 2nd floor of the basement, which was where the company's higher-ups parked. She looked at the time as she walked, but Yi Liangqiu didn't say anything. It was only when they arrived at the parking lot that Yi Liangqiu noticed that Qin Anlan was opening the car door and getting into the car. Ying Jie called President Qin. Qin Anlan nodded. Then, his gaze landed on Yi Liangqiu's face, and he was a little surprised. What happened? He asked with a frown. Before Yi Liangqiu could say anything, Ying Jie said, what else? Mo Xiaoqi slapped her. She paused for a moment. I'm going to take her to the hospital for a checkup. Qin Anlan looked at the palm print. Although it was quite heavy, it wasn't to the extent that she needed to go to the hospital. Ying Jie's meaning was clear. The injury was because of him. He glanced at Yi Liangqiu and said indifferently, yes, we should. He gestured to Kaim, who was stunned, to take a check for 500,000 yuan and give it to Yi Liangqiu. This was also to show respect to Ying Jie. He still had an important appointment, so he didn't say much and got into the car. Kaim drove and looked at President Qin's expression in the rearview mirror. She said, Ying Jie's attitude changed too quickly. Qin Anlan closed his eyes and didn't say anything. Kaim knew that President Qin didn't want people to talk about Yi Liangqiu. Chapter 1205. In the parking lot, Ying Jie looked at Yi Liangqiu and smiled. Get in. Yi Liangqiu nodded and got in the car, sitting next to Ying Jie. Ying Jie drove the car out of the parking lot and narrowed her eyes at the road ahead. She said calmly, where do you live? Yi Liangqiu was flattered and pursed her lips. Peace Road. She added, Ying Jie, I'll take the bus. Just drop me off at the front. How could she not tell that Ying Jie had asked her to go to the parking lot because she knew President Qin would be there? She felt grateful. Ying Jie was someone who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Ying Jie smiled and did not say it directly. Instead, she asked another question. Are you short of money? It was obvious that this little girl was a tough person. She had a rare pride in her. It was not the kind of tsunda, but it was similar to the style of ancient scholars. Nowadays, it could not be found in men, let alone a little girl. Ying Jie thought that Yi Liangqiu probably moved her because of her pride. There were many beauties in the entertainment industry, but not many of them were recognizable. Without personality, they could only be popular for a while and could not become an iconic figure of the times. She had requirements for the artists under her management. Mo Xiaoqi was not abandoned because she had a bad temper, but because she had no personality. She asked. Yi Liangqiu nodded. I'm short of money. Ying Jie paused. Is that why you came to King Entertainment? Yes. Yi Liangqiu nodded again. Sister Ying took out a thin and long cigarette from the console, lit it, and took a long drag. Then, she said faintly, in the entertainment industry, you can either be an extra for the rest of your life and be happy. If you lack money, you have to go to the top. You can't go up or down, and you can be replaced at any time. Pei Chichi looked at her. Ying Jie smiled again. This industry is very cruel. It's not as simple as you think. After a long time, Yi Liangqiu said, Thank you, Ying Jie. You're welcome. Our interests are tied together. Ying Jie's tone was very indifferent, without much emotion. As the manager, she would take 10% of the artist's after-tax income. So, Ying Jie had always thought that she and the artist would advance and retreat together. She had always looked at the artist's ability. Yi Liangqiu didn't say anything more. For her, the most important thing now was not whether she could become famous, but whether she could save Yizun. Ying Jie sent her to Heping Road. Yi Liangqiu bent down to say goodbye to her. Ying Jie looked into her eyes and said calmly, Remember, don't do anything to anger President Qin. King Entertainment can raise you to a height that you can't even imagine. Yi Liangqiu was stunned. Ying Jie continued, If you're smart, you know what to do. Under such a sharp gaze, Yi Liangqiu felt embarrassed, as if she had been seen through. Ying Jie didn't say anything else and drove away. Yi Liangqiu stood where she was for a long time. She took out her phone mechanically and flipped to the video she had taken. In the video, she could clearly see Qin Anlan's face and body, his expression as he leaned on her, and even the sweat dripping down his body. At that moment, she was a little conflicted. She knew what she was about to face, but she had no choice. Chapter 1206. Yi Liangqiu only feels sad when her mother is like this. Her father is a university professor. He married an uneducated childhood sweetheart. After a long time, I'm afraid they have no common language. But it's rare that they have been together for so many years, although they haven't been together. Su Cheng, the little bitch in Wang Ciyun's mouth, is Yizun's classmate, a typical rich girl, and Yizun has been very close. Yi Liangqiu has told Yizun more than once to keep a distance, but the 18-year-old Yizun is in love. How can he listen to her? Finally, something happened. Mom, I'm back. Yi Liangqiu put the bag on the sofa and said softly. Wang Ciyun prayed again, then turned around and looked at her with burning eyes. Liangqiu, how's Yizun? Do you have any way to get him out? Every day since the accident, her mother has asked her in this tone. Yi Liangqiu feels a little tired. Mom, I'll find a way. She took the 2 checks. I'll hire the best lawyer for Yizun. Yi Mu stared at her, with a little cold light in her eyes. Hire a lawyer? Do you want to kill your brother? She grabbed the check, looked at the signature on it, and then smiled coldly. Yi Liangqiu, are you bullying me because I can't read and can't see that this is your boss's check? You slept with him, didn't you? As she spoke, Mother Yi slapped Yi Liangqiu fiercely across the face. The force of the slap was so heavy that Yi Liangqiu's face tilted to the side. Her long hair spread across her cheeks, making her look indescribably miserable. Yi Liangqiu only felt a burning sensation on his face. His skin felt like it was about to burst, as if it would explode with a single touch. After a long time, she slowly turned back, but Wang Tsayun had already cried, "You are such a disappointing thing. How can you sleep with people? Your father's life has been ruined by you. Mom, what do you think I should do? Kneel down and beg Su Cheng?" Yi Liangqiu's heart was cold. Her mother valued her son and her daughter, but she was deeply hurt that her mother valued her son to such an extent. Wang Tsayun's expression was a little confused. "Of course I have to. Kneel until she agrees to drop the charges. Liangqiu, I beg you, please save your brother." Yi Liangqiu's fingers gently caressed her face. It was swollen and painful to touch. However, her mother couldn't see her injuries. In her heart, there was only Yi Zun. She chuckled softly and her voice became even softer. "Mom, why don't you go?" Mother Yi was stunned for a moment, and then burst into tears again. "Yi Liangqiu, your mother doesn't know how to get out of this door. If you let me out, where can I find that little bitch?" As she cried, she quickly tore up the check that added up to $1 million into pieces. Yi Liangqiu felt that her heart was also broken by her mother. She looked at the pieces on the ground for a long time before she smiled, although it hurt her heart. She didn't say anything, turned back, picked up her bag, and went to the door. Wang Tsayun cried out of breath. "Yi Liangqiu, where are you going? You unfilial daughter, don't you care about your mother?" Yi Liangqiu's voice became a little lighter. "Mom, I'm going to beg that little bitch." Wang Tsayun chased after her, grabbed her arm, and softened her voice. "Liangqiu, does your face hurt? Did mommy hurt you?" Yi Liangqiu suddenly turned back. She looked at her mother's face, and her pupils contracted violently. Chapter 1207. Yi Liangqiu looked at it and suddenly turned around. She picked up the pieces of the 2 checks and put them in her pocket. Wang Tsayun had been following her, begging her to save Yi Zun. Yi Liangqiu walked out and closed the door. Her back was against the door. Just now, she knew that the person she wanted to save was not just Yi Zun, but her mother. Her mother had gone mad. She had gone mad because of Yi Zun's matter. For the first time, she was willing to take a taxi to the Su family's villa. It was already evening and the sky was dyed red by the sunset glow. Yi Liangqiu stood in front of the Su family's house, looking at a black sports car in the courtyard. She recognized the license plate. The Su family's housekeeper came out to tell her that Miss had asked her to wait. Yi Liangqiu had been waiting outside, from 6:30 to 9 o'clock. She stood in the strong evening wind, straight and tall. Her white dress fluttered in the wind, making her stand out in the dark. Inside the Su family's mansion, Qin Anlan and Mr. Su finished their discussion and came out. Seeing Su Cheng standing by the window, he smiled faintly. Cheng, why are you standing here?" Su Cheng smiled sweetly at him and held his hand. "Anlan Ge, it's nothing. Are you done talking to Dad?" Qin Anlan nodded. "I'm done. I have to go back now. See you next time." Su Cheng pouted. "Anlan Ge, it's rare for you to come over. Please. Silly, you still have school tomorrow." He ruffled her hair and went downstairs. He started the car and slowly drove out of the Su family's mansion. But at the door, he seemed to see a familiar figure. Qin Anlan instinctively narrowed his eyes. He zoomed in and saw that it was Yi Liangqiu. But he did not stop the car and drove away quickly. The headlights stung Yi Liangqiu's eyes. She turned around to avoid it. When she turned back, the car had already slowly driven away. Su Cheng walked out in a pure dress with her princess hair. She was in a completely different world from Yi Liangqiu's current sorry state. With her hands behind her back, Su Cheng looked at Yi Liangqiu, tilted her head and smiled gently. "Sister Liangqiu, are you here for Yi Zun?" Of course, Yi Liangqiu was not stupid enough to think that begging her would work. She pursed her lips and said calmly, "How can I let Yi Zun go?" Su Cheng's face immediately made the appearance of a little white rabbit, looking very scared. She smiled softly and said, "Sister Liangqiu, you shouldn't say that. I really like Yi Zun, but he is still young. I don't want to be tied down so early." But Yi Zun can't wait. He covets our family's assets and thinks that he can do anything to me just by having sex with me. Sister Liangqiu, he wants to rape me, so of course I have to scream. I was so scared at that time. Yi Zun is like a beast, wanting to tear my clothes off. Su Cheng put on a good performance. After saying that, she smiled evilly. Sister Liangqiu, I know you always knew that I was just playing with Yi Zun. I just want to know under what circumstances such an obedient man would turn into a beast and be willing to take off his clothes. Yi Liangqiu listened to the girl in front of her say such words. She felt deeply sorry for Yi Zun. Yi Zun liked such a superficial and vicious girl. Out of love, he had thought that Su Cheng was a pure and innocent girl. However, just as he had thought that they were in love, Su Cheng had seduced him and then sued him for attempted rape. Chapter 1208. Yi Liangqiu looked at Su Cheng in front of her. What do you want? Do you want me to kneel down and beg you? Su Cheng chuckled and played with her fingers. Sister Liangqiu, aren't you curious why I'm toying with Yi Zun? Yi Liangqiu did not say anything. Su Cheng's expression was subtle and her voice turned cold. Because Sister Liangqiu was too popular in school. Hence, the little princess of the Su family was unhappy. Ever since she was young, she had always been the favorite and was the center of attention. However, when she entered high school, she found out that Yi Liangqiu was the dream lover of all the boys in school. How could this be? Hence, Yi Zun became the scapegoat. Yi Liangqiu looked down. Have you never liked Yi Zun? No. Su Cheng raised her head proudly. People like you don't even deserve to carry my shoes. She turned around and walked through the black carved door. Her voice was cold and incongruous with her appearance. He's going to jail for sure. If there's anyone to blame, it's you, Sister Liangqiu. No one else can be blamed. Yi Liangqiu stood there. She had found the answer. It was so ridiculous. Everything came from the little princess's displeasure. Hence, she sent a young man to jail. What kind of logic was this? Yi Liangqiu stood in the wind for a long time before she slowly walked back. She walked very slowly, and every step was painful. Yi Zun had been locked up for half a month. Her mother might need a huge sum of money to be hospitalized. She only had one way out. After walking for 100 meters, a black sports car drove over in front of him. The headlights of the car were very dazzling. She covered her eyes instinctively. The car turned around 5 meters in front of her and stopped. The door of the front passenger seat opened and a deep male voice rang out. Get in. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and looked at Qin Anlan in the car without moving. He lit a cigarette and said in a gloomy voice, My patience is limited. Only then did she open the door and get into the car. The high-performance sports car sped on the road. Her breathing was a little messy, and she didn't dare to look at him. Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of King Entertainment's building. His voice was cold. Get out. Yi Liangqiu turned her head and looked at him. Qin Anlan got out of the car, slammed the door, and walked toward the building. He was sure that she would follow him up. Yi Liangqiu got out of the car and silently followed behind him all the way into the elevator to his office. The fact that he chose to discuss this matter in his office made his position clear. Yi Liangqiu walked into his office. Qin Anlan's tone was a little indifferent. Close the door. She closed the door in a daze. Qin Anlan's gaze landed on her face. You already knew that I knew the Su family, didn't you? On the road just now, he had called Kaim to investigate when he was alone. Only then did he find out about the feud between Yi Liangqiu and the Su family. Now that he thought about it, her entering King Entertainment and even dedicating herself to him were all premeditated. Qin Anlan had been through a lot, but he had never thought that he would fall into the hands of a little girl. He pinched her chin and said in a cold voice, Where's the video? Yi Liangqiu wasn't surprised that he could figure it out so quickly. She took out her phone and placed it in his hand. Did you back it up? Qin Anlan took it, unlocked it and opened the video. His eyes became colder. The angle is not bad. Yi Liangqiu, you have guts. Chapter 1209. If I don't save your brother, are you going to publicize this? He returned her phone to her, his tone still calm. Yi Liangqiu mustered her courage and said, yes. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and then chuckled. Do you think I'm afraid? President Qin is not afraid. But once this video is released, the public will think that the female lead is Mo Xiaoqi. Yi Liangqiu stretched out her hand. There was a burn on her left wrist. All of Mo Xiaoqi's fans knew that Mo Xiaoqi's hand had been injured during filming. At that moment, Yi Liangqiu had the same burn on her wrist. But compared to Mo Xiaoqi's, one was new while the other was old. But how could they tell from the video? Qin Anlan did not care about Mo Xiaoqi's injury, but he hated being tied to Mo Xiaoqi in front of the media. There was no doubt that he was furious. The girl in front of him looked cold, but the things she did were enough to make him look at her in a different light. She was really capable. Not even 10 Mo Xiaoqis could think of these method. Qin Anlan's eyes were filled with coldness. There are two things I hate the most. The first is being schemed against by others, and the second is being threatened. And she had both of these things. Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes and said softly, I know. His eyes fell on her swollen face and he suddenly let go of her. He took a step back, his expression cold, as if he had made a decision. I will have the Su family withdraw their lawsuit, but don't let me see that video. Otherwise, you won't even know how you died. Tears trickled down her face. Yes. She had never been so humble before. But for Yi Zun, she was willing. Qin Anlan sat behind his desk and dialed a number with his landline phone. Then, he took a long drag on his cigarette. After a long time, the call connected and he said, President Su, there is something I need to trouble you with. After a long conversation, Qin Anlan smiled faintly and said, little girls are always a bit naughty. It's fine, I'll just have to coax Cheng Cheng later. Yes, she's my girlfriend. She's crying in front of me. I can't do anything about it. Yi Liangqiu's body stiffened as she looked at him. As he spoke, his gaze fell on her face. It was a little cold and unfamiliar. Yi Liangqiu's body trembled slightly. Finally, he hung up the phone and looked at her. Yi Zun will be released tonight. Thank you, she whispered. Qin Anlan looked at her. But you will pay for this. She looked at him. You know that Yi Zun is innocent. Yes. But what does that have to do with me? He looked at her coldly. What does it have to do with me? What you have done to me? Yi Liangqiu took out 2 pieces of the check from her pocket and placed them on his desk. Her face was swollen and her body trembled slightly. You slept with me once, so you helped me once. It's very fair. This was the first time someone had dared to talk about fairness in front of him. The word fairness was never in Qin Anlan's dictionary because it was ridiculous. He narrowed his long and narrow eyes and after a moment, he said coldly, get out. He didn't announce the result to her, but Yi Liangqiu knew that it would be difficult for her to move forward in King Entertainment. Ying Jie had warned her. She didn't regret it. She walked out of his office and out of the skyscraper of King Entertainment. Perhaps she would have to say goodbye. Chapter 1210. It was hard to wait for the late bus. She waited for 10 minutes but it was Qin Anlan's black sports car that arrived. It did not stop when it passed her, and it was very fast. Yi Liangqiu's eyes were a little watery. She watched as the car drove away and her legs felt a little weak. She reached out and held onto the road sign. It was then that she felt afraid. After a long time, the Route 11 bus finally arrived. It took her an hour to get back to her home on Hepping Road. Yi Zun had already arrived before her. When she opened the door, her mother, Wang Tsayun, was hugging Yi Zun and stroking her son's face over and over again happily, as though she had lost him and found him again. When she saw that Yi Liangqiu had returned, she merely said faintly, "You're back?" With that said, she stroked her son again, unwilling to let go. Yi Zun asked, "Sis, what happened to your face?" Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly. "Nothing. It's good that you're back." Yi Zun wanted to say something but stopped. At this moment, Wang Tsayun held her son's arm and said warmly, Mom made your favorite braised pork ribs. I've been waiting for you to come back. Go wash your hands and eat it. Sis, you haven't eaten either, right? Yi-zun looked at his sister and called out softly. I'm not hungry. I'll go take a shower first. Yi Liangqiu forced a smile and took her clothes into the bathroom. Yi-zun's gaze was a little sad. He knew that it was because of his sister that he was able to come out. His mother only knew how to spoil him and nothing else. He felt very guilty, but there was nothing else he could do. After waiting for his mother to fall asleep, he walked into Yi Liangqiu's bedroom. It was a small room of about 6 square meters. Compared to his 12 square meters, it was really too cramped. Sis, are you asleep? Yi-zun sat by the bed and asked softly. Yi Liangqiu's voice was a little low. Is the door closed? Yi-zun nodded. Yi Liangqiu gently sat up and reached out to touch Yi-zun's face. After a while, she said softly, Yi-zun, we have to sell the house. Because she might lose her job, because her mother needed treatment. Yi-zun's eyes widened as he stared at her. Mom is sick. She needs treatment. Yi Liangqiu said softly, this house can probably be sold for more than $1 million. We can rent a house and save the extra money for Mom's treatment. When big sister has the money, she can pay the down payment. By then, we will have a home again. As Yi Liangqiu spoke, she rested her head on Yi-zun's shoulder. Yi-zun, are you tired? Without a home, she would be even more tired. Yi-zun didn't say a word. He remembered that when they were young, his mother had an episode of illness. It had been a long time, and they had almost forgotten that she was sick. She had always been sick. Tilting his head, he looked at Yi Liangqiu, who was only a year older than him. He nodded slightly and said, okay. Yi Liangqiu forced a smile and rested her head on his shoulder again. Yi-zun, don't leave me again, okay? I don't know where to find you next time, and I don't know if I can find you again. Yi-zun, I don't know what else I can exchange for next time. The next day, she put up the house with the agent. Yi-zun was on vacation, so he stayed at home to take care of Wang Tsayun. Yi Liangqiu went to King Entertainment as usual. She didn't say anything to anyone, including Ying Jie. She just went to the training class, as usual. Chapter 12:11. After whispering a few words, Ying Jie scolded, does President Qin think this is a game? He can support and throw her away as he pleases. Kaim hurriedly said a few more words and Ying Jie finally calmed down. She turned to look at Yi Liangqiu and pursed her lips. This little girl is quite bold. She even dares to have designs on President Qin. Kaim sighed as well. That was why this was so difficult. How about this, Ying Jie, you wait and see. Maybe President Qin will change his mind later. Kaim thought for a moment and said. Actually, even if he didn't say it, Ying Jie knew that if something like this happened in the past, President Qin would have kicked the person out long ago. But this time, he didn't. He just kept the person in the cold storage. Who knew what President Qin would do next? After Kaim left, Ying Jie had mixed feelings. She looked at Yi Liangqiu inside and sighed. This girl was very talented. She had beautiful features and was suitable for the big screen. But this time, she had angered President Qin. She might not have a chance. Ying Jie was kind to Yi Liangqiu. She called her out and asked in a low voice, President Qin is very angry. Are you sure you want to stay? Yi Liangqiu looked at Ying Jie and nodded firmly. Not because she liked him, not because she was ambitious, but because she had no other choice. Yi Liangqiu was removed from the trainees and became a girl who did odd jobs at King Entertainment. She swept the floor, poured tea, did everything. And because of Mo Xiaoqi's overt and covert exclusion, her life became even more difficult. Ying Jie happened to be in England on a business trip and couldn't take care of her. Even if she could, Ying Jie couldn't be too biased. After all, it was President Qin who wanted to torture her. The manager of the logistics department had a good relationship with Mo Xiaoqi. He assigned all the dirty work to Yi Liangqiu. She was very, very tired during that period of time. She was also busy selling her house, selling it for $1 5 million. Her mother's condition had stabilized due to timely treatment and Yi Zun's safe return. This was a comfort to Yi Liangqiu. Her days at King Entertainment were tough, but for the sake of the 4,000 yuan salary, she gritted her teeth and continued. At this time, she was no longer the most promising campus belle of B High, and she was no longer the Yi Liangqiu who only knew how to write and write. She needed to make a living, and she needed to support her family. Her dreams had disappeared when she entered King Entertainment. She did not give up. She remembered what Ying Jie had said. Yi Liangqiu squatted down in the corridor of King Entertainment, trying her best to wipe the floor. She seemed to get tired easily these days, and her waist would ache after squatting for a while. A pair of exquisite red leather shoes appeared in front of her. She looked up and saw Mo Xiaoqi and a row of interns standing behind Mo Xiaoqi. Mo Xiaoqi placed her feet in front of Yi Liangqiu and raised her chin. I was wondering who it was. Turns out it's King Entertainment's star. Oh yeah, Yi Liangqiu, why are you wiping the floor here? Yi Liangqiu ignored her and continued to wipe the floor, but how could Mo Xiaoqi let her off? She sneered and stepped on her rag with her high heels. Help me wipe my shoes. Yi Liangqiu stood up slowly. She looked at Mo Xiaoqi and said slowly, Miss Mo, I'm not serving you alone. Listen, you sound very virtuous. Mo Xiaoqi chuckled. Do you still think you're the Yi Liangqiu of the past? Let me tell you, if President Qin wants someone to be famous, then they'll be famous. If he wants someone to be buried forever, you won't be able to do anything, no matter how capable you are. Chapter 12:12. The sarcasm in her words infuriated Mo Xiaoqi. She raised her hand and was about to slap her again when a voice reprimanded her. What's going on? When did King allow you to hit someone in the company? It was Ying Jie. Next to her was Qin Anlan. Qin Anlan seemed to be discussing something with Ying Jie. Ying Jie walked him out of the office. Mo Xiaoqi immediately pretended to be obedient and said, Ying Jie, I just wanted to teach the disobedient newcomer a lesson. Who asked her to disrespect me? If you change your temper, your career will probably improve a lot. Ying Jie glanced at her and then at Yi Liangqiu. Get on with your work. She sighed in her heart. Such a good girl had ruined her future. When she turned back, she saw that Qin Anlan had already walked towards the elevator. Mo Xiaoqi flicked her sleeves and left reluctantly. Those interns didn't dare to do that. They were all counting on Ying Jie to promote them. Ying Jie looked at them one by one and said sternly, Go and do 1,000 squat. She couldn't stand internal strife in the company. Would they become famous if they defeated their own people? After everyone left, Ying Jie looked at Yi Liangqiu and said in a gentler voice, Get up. Come to my office. Yi Liangqiu put down the things in her hands and followed Ying Jie in. As soon as they entered, Ying Jie got angry. Yi Liangqiu, did you come to King Entertainment to get 4,000 yuan and just to sweep the floor? No. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. Ying Jie continued to fire. Did you see President Qin's attitude? He doesn't care. President Qin has always hated Mo Xiaoqi's behavior, but he didn't intervene today. Do you know what that means? Yi Liangqiu finally looked up at Ying Jie. Ying Jie said very slowly, It's President Qin who is suppressing you, not someone else. Although it was cruel, it was the truth. Yi Liangqiu looked a little worried. Ying Jie looked at her and felt bad for her. She said mildly, I'll talk to President Qin. Get to work. Yi Liangqiu thanked him and walked out. Ying Jie didn't manage to convince Qin Anlan. Yi Liangqiu still spent her time cleaning and sending and receiving documents. Before Qin Anlan could unseal her, fate had played a big joke on her. Yi Zun committed suicide. He jumped from the 8th floor of the school, ending his young life. When Yi Liangqiu rushed to the school, her legs were weak. Yi Zun's face was covered by a white cloth, and he was lying upright. She walked over slowly, wanting to call his name and wake him up. But when she opened her mouth, she could only speak in a hoarse voice. She couldn't say a word. Yi Zun was so young, innocent, and beautiful. She slowly knelt beside Yi Zun. Her fingers were trembling as she lifted the white cloth on his face. Yi Zun seemed to be alive, except that he was asleep. Yi Liangqiu's fingers touched his face gently. It was cold. She remembered that Yi Zun's body had always been warm, especially from the ground. She often hugged him to keep warm in the winter. Yi Zun, a stream of blood slowly seeped out from the back of his head, staining her eyes red. Yi Zun. Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes and knelt on the ground, crying silently. At this moment, it was as if she had returned to the day their father passed away. She was helpless and didn't know what to do. Yi Sheng held her hand and told her to take good care of her mother and Yi Zun. Chapter 12-13. Yi Liangqiu cried silently. It was quiet all around and no one dared to step forward. In such silence, Yi Liangqiu let out a mournful cry, Yi Zun, but he could no longer stand up and call her sister. Someone started to pull her back and comfort her. But how could she? Her mother had gone crazy and Yi Zun was dead. Her only hope was Yi Zun. Yi Zun could no longer come back to life. Even if they lost their home, Yi Zun couldn't find a place to go home even if he wanted to. Yi Liangqiu had experienced the saddest day of her life. She didn't know how she sent Yi Zun off, but someone kept pulling her back. When she went to the school to deal with Yi Zun's funeral, the school gave a vague explanation, saying that it was because of Yi Zun's personal feelings and that it had nothing to do with the school. Yi Liangqiu sat opposite the principal. She used to be Wang Xiao's most admired female student, but now she was the parent of the victim. Liangqiu, I understand how you feel, but I have my difficulties too. Wang Xiao hinted, our teachers are also very sad that something happened to Yi Zun. He was such an outstanding student. Wang Xiao continued, there are some things that we are not clear about and are still investigating. But I think as Yi Zun's sister, you should know more about his private life than us. Yi Liangqiu looked straight at Wang Xiao. Wang Xiao squeezed out a bitter smile, that's what happened. I can only say that Yi Zun's psychological quality is a little poor. Gossip is a fearful thing, and it can kill. Yi Liangqiu looked straight at Wang Xiao and said softly, it was Su Cheng who spread the rumor that Yi Zun wanted to rape her, right? Wang Xiao didn't say anything but sighed, the answer was obvious. However, out of appreciation for Yi Liangqiu, Wang Xiao kindly reminded her, Liangqiu, if you go head on with this matter, not only will you not be able to find any evidence against Su Cheng, but you will also be pushing yourself into the fire. He looked at Yi Liangqiu with a burning gaze. Liangqiu, you know what I mean, right? The arm is no match for the thigh. Yi Liangqiu looked at Wang Xiao. After a long time, she said softly, I understand. How could she not understand? She had nothing. What could she use to sue Su Cheng? What should he sue Su Cheng about? However, Yi Zun was indeed killed by Su Cheng's rumors. She wouldn't let it go. Yi Liangqiu's eyes were as cold as ice. She wouldn't let it go, but she would wait for the day when she had the ability to seek justice for Yi Zun. Out of humanity, the school compensated Yi Zun's death with 500,000 yuan. Yi Liangqiu didn't refuse. She took the money and took out the remaining money, begging the buyer to sell the house to her. She sold it for 1.5 million yuan and spent 2 million yuan to buy it back. She owed the bank hundreds of thousands of yuan. On the day when she got the house, she took Yi Zun's photo home. He died at such a young age. After his death, he had to have a home to return to. Yi Liangqiu looked at Yi Zun's photo and stood there for a long time. At night, she took out her mobile phone and looked at the video. She knew clearly that she needed fame. She needed money. She needed power. And only Qin Anlan could give her these. But after so long, maybe Qin Anlan had forgotten who she was. The only thing they had in common was that sex incident. Chapter 12-14. Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was fearless. She quickly logged into a website and gently pressed the send button. The video was sent out. Almost immediately, the video went viral. Although the public didn't know the male lead, Mo Xiaoqi's fans knew every inch of their idol's glory. And Mo Xiaoqi's main image was that of a pure and innocent girl. So in just one night, Mo Xiaoqi's fans had taken over Mo Xiaoqi's social media account. They were all scolding her for being a green tea. The impact spread further. Like sharks smelling blood, the reporters flocked to King Entertainment in the middle of the night. Especially Mo Xiaoqi, who was still filming late at night, was inexplicably surrounded. She was so aggrieved that she cried. In the end, her manager found a way to get her out. Sitting in the car, Mo Xiaoqi exploded. Who did this? Although she had longed to hook up with President Qin, she had long since given up hope after all these years. The person who sent the video is so sinister, Mo Xiaoqi said hatefully. President Qin must think I did it. She looked at her manager with a slightly panicked expression. Do I need to explain to President Qin or hold a press conference to clarify things? Her manager was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He was very thin and his name was Liang Quan. He comforted her gently. The point is this woman you? If not, wouldn't you be asking for trouble by holding a press conference yourself? Mo Xiaoqi only took a few glances before saying with certainty, of course it's not me. Liang Quan smiled. Then let's see how President Qin handles it. What I mean is, bide your time. As for who this woman was, President Qin should know best. With tears in her eyes, Mo Xiaoqi looked at Liang Quan, pursed her lips and nodded. At King Entertainment's headquarters, all the employees were urgently recalled because the video posted on a certain social media site this afternoon was a huge scandal for King Entertainment. The arrow pointed to the unspoken rules within King Entertainment. Kaim stood at the door of Qin Anlan's office, almost scared out of her wits. President Qin had lost his temper. Kaim wanted to ask if it was Mo Xiaoqi, but she didn't dare to. She just stood at the door, trembling. Qin Anlan sat before his desk and took a deep drag on his cigarette. Then, he glanced at Kaim. Call Ying Jie and ask Yi Liangqiu to come over. Kaim was obviously stunned. Yi Liangqiu? President Qin meant that the woman was Yi Liangqiu? This was simply shocking. Isn't Yi Liangqiu pitiful enough? How dare he provoke President Qin? How much courage did he have? After recovering from his shock, Kaim immediately went to do it. Ying Jie called Yi Liangqiu right in front of him, but her phone was turned off. Ying Jie looked at Kaim. His phone is turned off. There's nothing we can do. Let's contact him tomorrow. Kaim whined incessantly. Sis, I'm begging you, let this little lady come back quickly. Ying Jie looked at him and said mildly, Yi Liangqiu hasn't come to work for more than 10 days. Kaim was stunned. What's going on? Don't tell me she can't take it anymore. Ying Jie's expression turned serious and she said softly, Yi Liangqiu's brother, Yi Zun, committed suicide. Even Kaim was stunned. How could this be? Ying Jie smiled. Kaim, you've been with President Qin for so long, but you can't even handle President Qin like a little girl. Kaim laughed bitterly. He agreed with Ying Jie's words. Chapter 12:15. Back in the CEO's office on the top floor, Kaim's voice was trembling. Yi Liangqiu turned off her phone. With that, he looked at President Qin as he extinguished the cigarette in his hand. Based on his understanding of President Qin, he would definitely start a massacre. Kaim said instinctively, President Qin, something happened to Yi Liangqiu's family. Her brother jumped to his death. Qin Anlan's body trembled. He looked up at Kaim for a few seconds. Kaim knew that if he offended President Qin now, he would probably have to pack up and leave. But he still braced himself and said, President Qin, can you let her off the hook? Qin Anlan's gaze fell on Kaim's face for a long time. She looked at him for a long time before she said softly, give him a way out. If she does this, not only will she destroy Mo Xiaoqi, but she will also cause irreparable harm to King Entertainment. Qin Anlan laughed coldly. Also, Kaim, go downstairs and see how many reporters are surrounding King Entertainment. Of course Kaim knew, so he didn't have much confidence when he pleaded. Qin Anlan lit another cigarette. Tell her to come see me. If I don't see her tonight, I'll settle it my own way. Kaim immediately walked out. I'll definitely get her back. But as soon as Kaim opened the door, he saw Yi Liangqiu standing outside. The lights in the office shone on the corridor outside, casting a smooth profile on her face. It was beautiful, but it made her look even paler. Qin Anlan had always felt that she was suited for the big screen. He hadn't been sure of her acting skills, but after this incident, he had a new understanding of Yi Liangqiu. At 19 years old, she was at least 30 years old. He thought that he hated it. He hated it when women played mind games with him, but at the same time, he admired it. He squinted at her pale little face and said calmly, Kaim, go out. I have something to discuss with Miss Yi. Kaim backed out of the room and signaled for Yi Liangqiu to go in. Then, he closed the door. In the spacious office, there were only Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlan. He didn't say anything, and the room was so quiet that only her rapid breathing could be heard. Qin Anlan looked at her. He sat on the sofa and said sternly, Miss Yi, what do you want this time? Yi Liangqiu pressed her back against the door tightly. After a long time, she said softly, I want the opportunity that King Entertainment has put in the best possible effort. After she finished speaking, Qin Anlan stared at her intently. After a long time, he slowly stood up and walked towards her. She instinctively moved to the side, but he moved faster, trapping her between him and the door. With one hand on her shoulder and the other holding her chin, he looked at her deeply. Why did you do this? He laughed coldly. It can't be because of Mo Xiaoqi. He moved closer to her, his voice a little cold. Because of Su Cheng? Chem? He was too shrewd and she couldn't hide anything from him, so she just admitted it. She lifted her little face and smiled lightly. Yes. So, you killed 2 birds with 1 stone and made a joke out of my King Entertainment, His voice rang beside her ear. It was very gentle, but there was a trace of shivering in it. Yi Liangqiu slowly opened her eyes. She turned her head and looked at him. What does President Qin think? His fingers gently stroked her delicate little face and he smiled coldly. Don't tell me you don't know that the Su family and I are family friends. I know. She didn't avoid his gaze. Chapter 12:16. Their lips were very close, so close that they could almost see each other's eyes. He stared into her eyes. Why did you provoke me when you knew? Because I had no other choice. Her beautiful eyes were too dazzling at this moment. They were intertwined with hatred. She was like an avenging angel. If her gaze was placed on the big screen, it would be enough to shock millions of people. At the same time, this pair of eyes convinced Qin Anlan. He was a businessman. He would only do what was beneficial to him. Suddenly, he let go of her and took 2 steps back. Yi Liangqiu immediately reached behind her to support herself against the door. Otherwise, she would slip and fall. Qin Anlan pulled her over and called Kaim over. Help me contact the media downstairs. I want to hold a press conference. Kaim looked at him holding Yi Liangqiu and was already shocked. Then he heard Qin Anlan's calm voice. I want to make my relationship with Yi Liangqiu public. Relationship? Kaim looked for his jaw. Was President Qin joking? How could this relationship be disclosed so casually? Moreover, the fact that President Qin had given in was enough to show that Yi Liangqiu was valuable enough to be used. But President Qin had tied her to him. Wouldn't it be troublesome in the future? But Kaim couldn't resist. He nodded and said, I'll make the arrangements immediately. After Kaim left, Qin Anlan lowered his head. His gaze was gentle, but his voice was cold. In a while, just do as I say. Yi Liangqiu, if you dare to cause trouble again, I guarantee that you will regret it. She pursed her lips and didn't speak. Her stubbornness made him unhappy. But Qin Anlan had never thought about what would happen next. They were partners and enemies, so he instinctively didn't like her personality. Later on, he met Pei Chichi and was deeply attracted to her. For the past few years, he had never thought that Pei Chichi was actually the other side of Yi Liangqiu. It was the Yi Liangqiu that he wanted to like but was unwilling to like. After he finished speaking, he took the lead and walked out. His voice was very calm. To the conference room. Yi Liangqiu ran a few steps to catch up with him, her small hand holding his big hand. Qin Anlan's footsteps paused. He turned his head and looked at her small hand with a complicated expression. Yi Liangqiu raised her head and smiled. Anlan, let's go. However, he did not move. After a while, he said, pay attention to your eyes. There is no love in your eyes, only fear. She was stunned for a moment, but he had already walked forward. His large palms closed, and he slowly held her hand. He walked in front and she followed. Yi Liangqiu was very tall at 172 centimeters, but behind Qin Anlan, who was 186 centimeters tall, she walked like a little bird. Keim had already arranged for the reporters to be seated. Even though it was late at night, there were still more than 20 mainstream media outlets attending the conference. From this, it could be seen that Yi Liangqiu had cast a huge stone. Qin Anlan walked in holding Yi Liangqiu's hand. He stood at the head of the table, and his posture was indifferent. However, when he looked at Yi Liangqiu, his gaze was as gentle as water and full of love. Keim, who was at the side, secretly wiped her tears. Their President Qin's acting was the real deal. If President Qin went into acting, those little fresh meats would not be able to stand a chance. Look at his gaze, his body movements, it was full of acting. Qin Anlan helped Yi Liangqiu onto the stage, took the microphone, and looked at her dotingly. He then said, I believe that the video between me and Liangqiu tonight has caused a lot of trouble for everyone. Here, I would like to apologize to the public. Because of my carelessness, the video was leaked. Of course, I would also like to apologize to my Liangqiu for not protecting you well. He leaned over and kissed her lightly on the lips. Chapter 12:17. Qin Anlan only kissed her lightly before leaving her lips. But his gaze was gentle. In that instant, Yi Liangqiu's heart trembled. He didn't say much. He just caressed her cheek with his palm. Everything was said without words. Anyone who doubted their relationship would have their doubts dispelled. No one would doubt that such a gaze didn't come from the eyes of someone in love. Yes, that's it. Qin Anlan leaned against her ear, his voice low and husky. Then, he put his arm around her shoulder and said calmly, Do you have any more questions? A reporter asked sharply, President Qin, I heard that Ms. Yi is an artiste from King Entertainment. What I would like to ask is, did she become your girlfriend first or the company's artiste first? Qin Anlan smiled. Is this important? The reporter instinctively said, Very important. Qin Anlan smiled faintly. This is not important to me at all. Liangqiu is a very talented girl. I hope to help her. The last sentence was very important. The reporters had been in this industry for a long time. President Qin's words were very meaningful. It seemed that Yi Liangqiu would be the newcomer that King Entertainment was promoting. Looking closely, she was indeed special. She didn't have the sweetness of Asia's Mo Xiaoqi, but the charm. Given time, she would definitely shine. Qin Anlan's voice was very serious. Ms. Yi and I are in a proper relationship. Please be careful when you write. If there is any false content, King Entertainment will pursue legal responsibility. His gaze turned gentle when he looked at Yi Liangqiu. She is a good girl. I want to treat her well. I want to give her the best. The reporter had originally come to catch up on the news. Now that he was fed a mouthful of dog food, he was caught off guard. However, it was the entertainment industry. Who knew what would happen in the future? But the headline in front of them could be written that the head of King Entertainment had found the right girl. A sparrow had turned into a phoenix. Yi Liangqiu stood beside Qin Anlan. She was dressed in plain clothes, but she didn't look timid at all. She had her own proud temperament. The reception ended quickly. Keim treated everyone to a late-night snack and politely sent them off. When he arrived at President Qin's office, he still didn't dare to enter. He turned around and saw Ying Jie. You should avoid it, Keim advised. Ying Jie nodded and followed Keim to Keim's office. In the president's office, Qin Anlan held a new document in one hand and a cigarette in the other. There was a cold look on his handsome face. After reading the document, he pushed it in front of Yi Liangqiu, who was sitting opposite him. See if there are any problems. If there aren't, then sign it. Yi Liangqiu took it and read it carefully. 10 years was as long as a contract to sell one's body. She looked up and her gaze was fixed on Qin Anlan's face. She only paused for 2 seconds before lowering her head and signing the document. Qin Anlan pressed her hand, his voice a little hoarse. Are you sure you want to sign it? The back of his hand was warm, but her fingers were cold. Her hand trembled when she felt the cold and the warmth. She looked up again and met his eyes. Qin Anlan felt that he had never seen such a determined gaze. He didn't know why, but his heart softened a little. Yi Liangqiu, have you thought it through? If you sign this, it means that you will spend the best years of your life at King Entertainment, no matter if it's good or bad. Chapter 12:18. He suddenly felt a little depressed. He extinguished the cigarette butt and lit another one. He looked at her impassively and said, "Okay." He put away the documents and looked at her deeply. Then he pressed the intercom. "Keim, come in with Ying Jie." Keim came in a minute. She looked at Qin Anlan with a burning gaze. Ying Jie was much calmer. "Start training her tomorrow. Report to my office from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. every day." Qin Anlan's voice was impassive. Keim was in disbelief. President Qin didn't pursue the matter with Yi Liangqiu? How big of a mess would that be? But Qin Anlan really didn't pursue the matter. He just raised his hand and gestured for them to leave. After they left, Qin Anlan sat alone in his office. His surroundings were peaceful. He felt a little lonely. That loneliness was close to invincibility and bordering on boredom. King Entertainment hadn't had any surprises for a long time. It was like his life. He used to love someone so passionately, but in the end, it was like fireworks disappearing without a trace. Qin Anlan was very lonely. Life was like stagnant water. So when Yi Liangqiu appeared, she was so unafraid of death. That piqued his interest. But it wasn't love between a man and a woman. He was more interested in making her into an iconic work. He sat there and smoked a few cigarettes. He didn't leave the office until 2 p.m. It was drizzling when he left. The black sports car was a little slow. He held the steering wheel with one hand and smoked with the other. It was late at night. There were no pedestrians on the road. Only the occasional car passed behind him. He drove slowly until he saw a familiar figure. It was Yi Liangqiu. Her face and body were covered in fine raindrops. She walked straight in the rain, her face was pale. There wasn't even a trace of soul in her. She was as clean as a piece of white paper, but there was an unresolvable gloom in her bones. Qin Anlan looked at her and felt that she was like a mystery. He couldn't see through her. He could have driven over and ignored her, but in the end, he stopped the car beside her. The car window rolled down. He looked at her drenched body and said coldly, "Get in the car." Yi Liangqiu slowly tilted his head, and then fell down just like that. He fell down softly, without any warning. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and cursed under his breath. He opened the car door and got out immediately. He picked up the person on the ground and placed her in the car. Then, he checked her forehead. Luckily, she didn't have a fever. But it was definitely not okay to wear wet clothes like this. Qin Anlan did not hesitate to tear off her clothes and remove everything. When she appeared so tender, the visual impact of black and white was so obvious. His breath was a little hot. He grabbed a blanket and covered her up in a flustered manner. When he sat in the driver's seat again, he put his hands on the steering wheel. Qin Anlan's gaze slowly looked down. He looked at his own desire and laughed at himself. When did his self-control become so bad? The car drove to his penthouse in the elite area of B City and parked in the underground garage. He took the exclusive elevator and carried her upstairs. She was only wrapped in a blanket. He carried her straight to the bed in the guest room and put her down. He wanted to go back to the room to take a shower, but his feet weren't steady. His body was on top of hers, and there was not a trace of it. Yi Liangqiu also woke up at this time. Chapter 12:19. Her feminine instincts told her that she was not wearing a single piece of clothing. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and instinctively slapped him. In the dark night, the sound of the slap was exceptionally clear. Qin Anlan's face was slapped to the side. Her breathing was a little erratic and she struggled. "Let go of me." Qin Anlan pursed his thin lips and stared at her face maliciously. No woman had ever dared to treat him like this. Almost immediately, her hands were pressed down and raised high above her head. She was pinned to the ground. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and sneered. "Yi Liangqiu, do you think I need to force a woman?" He restrained her with one hand and switched on the bedside lamp with the other. Under the bright light, she felt even more ashamed. He seemed to be deliberately humiliating her as he looked at her carefully under the light. She was breathtakingly beautiful in bed. If it wasn't for the fact that King had promoted her, Qin Anlan thought that he would have made love to her right then and there. Yi Liangqiu was embarrassed and angry. She stretched her leg out to kick him. However, when her foot touched him, Qin Anlan cursed and rolled to the side. It seemed that she had kicked a place that she shouldn't have. Yi Liangqiu knelt by the side and bit her lip. "Qin Anlan?" Her voice was a little fragile and strangely, it hit his heart. Qin Anlan stretched out his hand and suddenly pulled her onto his body. Her lips were right on his. It was soft and warm. She looked at him and her little hand was on his chest. She felt a little helpless. Compared to him, she was like a blank piece of paper, innocent and fragile. Qin Anlan kissed her wantonly, sucking on her little mouth and tasting every bit of her beauty. At this moment, he was moved, which was rare. The big palm could not help but throw the blanket aside. His fingers intertwined with hers as he worshipped her beauty bit by bit. Yi Liangqiu panted softly. Her long hair spread out hopelessly. Her fingers were clasped by him. If she struggled, she would send herself to him. The air was filled with the scent of hormones. She stopped struggling and lay down. She felt that she was being carried very, very high up in the sky, as if she could not come back down. She called his name uncomfortably, "Qin Anlan." Qin Anlan's body trembled. Then, he paused and looked down at the person in his arms. Her hair was wet and stuck to her little face, covering her bright and clean face. Her red lips were trembling slightly, constantly trembling. It was extremely alluring. She was Yi Liangqiu. It was no one else. Qin Anlan calmed down and finally let go of her. He lay down and said, "Go take a shower." Just now, they were one step away from having sex again. For Qin Anlan, it was against his principles. Both of them were embarrassed. For Qin Anlan, it was even more unacceptable that he could not control himself. For a long time, she did not move. He tilted his head and looked at her. After a long time, he got up quietly. He walked to the window and took out a cigarette from his pocket. He did not light it, but just put it in his mouth. His back looked a little lonely. Yi Liangqiu looked at him. She had never thought that a person like Qin Anlan would be lonely. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. She sat there and looked at him with her arms around her knees. She did not know that she was studying this man and analyzing him in her heart. And she did not know the reason. Chapter 12:20. She lay on her knees and smiled lightly. "Qin Anlan, don't you think you're being too superior?" He didn't find the smile in her eyes. He continued to look at her with a judgmental gaze. Yi Liangqiu looked down and said after a while, "I won't fall in love with anyone." "That better be the case." His voice was cold as he walked towards the door. As he held the doorknob, his tone was indifferent. "Sleep early. Also, don't wander around." I'll get someone to prepare clothes for you tomorrow. Yi Liangqiu was still hugging herself. She didn't realize how seductive she looked at that moment. Qin Anlan walked out, leaving the room in darkness. Yi Liangqiu then collapsed. She wrapped herself in the bedsheet and looked at her surroundings. It was late at night. There was the sound of rain outside. The sound was even clearer after the lights were turned off. She didn't sleep. She just looked out of the window. Yi Zun, I'm one step closer to success. Yes, her fainting was fake. Everything was fake. Only her pain and her hatred were real. She had to get Qin Anlan's attention in order to succeed. Otherwise, she might be trampled to death before she could succeed. She couldn't sleep. She kept her eyes open until 4 in the morning. In the end, she couldn't help but go to the bathroom attached to the guest room to wash up. There was a bathrobe in the bathroom. She put it on and walked out of the bedroom barefooted. The apartment was a large flat with an area of more than 200 square meters. The huge living room was about 100 square meters. Her fair feet stepped on the pure white wool carpet without making any sound. She walked in the dark, and the darkness was perfect for her state of mind. Suddenly, the lights in the living room turned on. Qin Anlan sat on the sofa in front of the French window. He was wearing a bathrobe with a loose collar, revealing his well-defined muscles. He held a glass of red wine and looked in her direction with a burning gaze. I can't sleep. Yi Liangqiu tightened her legs and her toes squirmed uneasily. President Qin, I'm going back to sleep. His gaze fell on the bathrobe she was wearing. After a while, he said indifferently, if you can't sleep, come over and have a glass of red wine. Yi Liangqiu walked over slowly and sat opposite him, feeling a little uneasy. Qin Anlan took a cup for her and poured half a cup for her. It's for sleeping. She took it but did not drink it. He smiled, raised his head, and drank the tea in his cup. After drinking, he chuckled and said, What? Are you afraid that I will drug you? Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes and smiled lightly. Why would President Qin need it? She took a sip and then stopped drinking. Qin Anlan looked at her. She was so well behaved that she looked like a little saint. He chuckled, then laid on his back, closed his eyes, and asked her a question. Yi Liangqiu, if you had to choose, one is to be my wife, the other is to be an international movie queen, which would you choose? Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. After a long while, she said softly, if it's because of love, I would rather be Mrs. Qin. Her answer was obvious. Qin Anlan smiled and continued to pour himself a glass of wine. It was strange. He should have hated her. He should have pushed her to the bottom of King Entertainment and tortured her. But he did not. Instead, he allowed her to chat with him in his bathrobe. 19 years old. How young. Perhaps it was because she had endured too much and her stubbornness had moved him. Chapter 12:21. Barefooted, Yi Liangqiu suddenly stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window behind him. She leaned against it and looked at the boundless night outside. She said in a low voice, Qin Anlan, do you believe in fate? Why? He laughed dryly, his voice a little bewitching. Yi Liangqiu's voice became even lower. I didn't believe in it in the past, but now I'd rather believe in ghosts and gods. If that was the case, Yi Zun wouldn't have disappeared from this world. He would have left behind some of his spirit. Even if it was just a wisp of his spirit. Otherwise, she would be too lonely in this world. Qin Anlan looked at the wine in his glass for a long time before replying, Yi Liangqiu, I believe you're not the kind of person who believes in these things. If she did, she wouldn't have done all these things. She lifted her head and stood in front of his floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the bright moon outside. She started crying. She didn't believe in fate in the past, but Yi Zun's death made her understand that there was a kind of reincarnation that couldn't be avoided. Qin Anlan waited for a long time, but she didn't say anything. He stood up slowly and looked at her back view. Her thin shoulders were trembling. Was she crying? Qin Anlan thought of Keim's words and pursed his thin lips. He wasn't a soft-hearted person, but on a night like this, he was willing to comfort a sad young lady. Just take it as, for the value of his merchandise. He stood behind her and brought her into his arms. Yi Liangqiu's body stiffened at first, and then she was lying on his shoulder. His body smelled refreshed after a shower, and it smelled good. She buried her face in his shoulder, and the warmth made her want to cry. If you want to cry, I can lean on you. Qin Anlan's tone was light, but because it was light and because it was night time, it seemed especially gentle. Yi Liangqiu buried her face deeper. Perhaps it was because she had been lonely and hurt for too long, but she didn't reject this gentleness. Even though she knew it was dangerous, even though she knew it was like poison, she still reached out and hugged his waist, tighter. Qin Anlan lowered his head and looked at the little black head in his arms. He reached out and rubbed her hair. How can there be such a stubborn little fellow? He admitted that he had been lonely for a long time, which was why he had taken in such a little thing and allowed her to walk into his world. When he rubbed her little head, Yi Liangqiu was stunned for a moment. Then, she buried herself deeper in his arms. Then, he felt a hot and wet sensation in his chest. It was very uncomfortable. He let her cry. He stood at the top of the city, hugged her, and told her, Yi Liangqiu, if you don't want to cry one day, then you have to stand higher than anyone else. Stand in a position where no one can hurt you. When he said this, he didn't expect that she would use the same words against him in the future, telling him that he couldn't do anything to her. But no matter what, at this moment, Yi Liangqiu was still a girl who was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Whatever she wanted, she had to go through Qin Anlan. So she dealt with him as if she was walking on thin ice. Even though she hated herself for being like this, she felt that she was repulsive. Yi Liangqiu cried, but every drop of her tears was for herself. Qin Anlan's warmth could warm her body, but it couldn't warm her heart. Chapter 12:22. Qin Anlan moved his face away. He looked at her and said hoarsely, "You're drunk." Yi Liangqiu was still looking up at him. Her gaze was rare and innocent. Most men would feel a sense of satisfaction when they were looked at like that, and so would Qin Anlan. But at this moment, he didn't have any intention of moving his eyes, because he didn't see any emotion in her eyes. "I'm not drunk." She looked at him. "Qin Anlan, don't you want me?" Qin Anlan's fingers gently stroked her alluring red lips, and then he got close to her and said in a low voice, "What scene are you going to shoot this time?" She immediately left his embrace and glared at him. He smiled, "A little girl." "I'm not." Yi Liangqiu's voice was very low. "I haven't been one for a long time." Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and naturally understood what she meant. He paused for a moment, and his voice was a little cold. "Go to sleep." There was more or less a sense of command in his tone. Yi Liangqiu glanced at him, walked slowly back to the guest room, and closed the door. Qin Anlan looked at the dark night outside the window again. She was gone, and the annoying temptation was gone, but he seemed to feel a little bored again. He didn't know why he suddenly felt like this. Maybe it was because he was too bored. Or maybe she was very interesting. In the eyes of others, Yi Liangqiu was just like her name, cold, stubborn, and not interesting. Only Qin Anlan thought she was interesting. Just like at the press conference, when he kissed her, she was clearly scared, but she pretended to be calm. Just like just now, she was clearly not drunk, but she pretended to be drunk to kiss him. She actually didn't want to. Qin Anlan knew more or less about a woman's body. She would never like to do this kind of thing, because the first time was not a good memory. He was not gentle, and even rough. In this state, she should be extremely afraid. He laughed, feeling it was interesting. He really wanted to know what she wanted to do. However, he knew her ultimate goal. This was also the reason why he was willing to support her. Only those who knew what they wanted would try their best to get it. Yi Liangqiu was exactly the person he was looking for. He returned to his bedroom and strangely fell asleep. He had always suffered from insomnia and could not sleep more than 4 hours a day. Tonight was supposed to be another sleepless night, but strangely, he fell asleep. Moreover, he woke up very late. Opening his eyes, the sunlight outside shone through the heavy curtains, leaving an afterglow on his body. Qin Anlan opened his eyes and immediately covered his eyes. Shun Yin screamed and rolled over again. He actually wanted to sleep a little longer. With that thought in mind, he fell asleep again. When he woke up again, it was already 11 in the afternoon. Sitting up, he shook his head. His mind was clearer than ever. After getting out of bed and washing himself, he put on a set of casual clothes and walked towards the living room. He was going to the kitchen to get a glass of milk to drink. He had never had the habit of eating breakfast, so when he saw a bowl of porridge and 2 side dishes on the small dining table, he was a little surprised, but he still sat down to eat. Qin Anlan had lived abroad for a long time, so he had almost forgotten about Chinese breakfast. At this time, the taste was surprisingly good. Unknowingly, he finished the porridge and ate most of the side dishes. Chapter 12:23. They stared at each other for a long time before he asked softly, "Is there any porridge left?" "Oh," she replied, then shook her head and raised the dishes in her hands. "But there's lunch." Qin Anlan pretended to reply nonchalantly and walked out of the small dining room. "You can cook then. I'll wait outside." Her culinary skills were absolutely amazing. Perhaps because he was used to eating sumptuous meals, the dishes and porridge tasted especially good. Yi Liangqiu went into the kitchen quietly and quickly prepared 3 dishes and a soup. When she came over to ask him to eat, she was worried that he wouldn't be able to eat, but Qin Anlan ate 2 bowls of rice and finished all the dishes she made. Yi Liangqiu ate quietly as she looked at his bowl. Wasn't he full? As she looked at him, he looked back at her, because she was wearing his clothes. It was a pair of sports shorts and a light blue shirt. Because she was very tall, it was only slightly bigger. Not only was it not ugly, but it also accentuated her slender legs and slender waist. Qin Anlan had never let any woman try wearing his white shirt, but Yi Liangqiu looked very good in it. It was pure and seductive. He smoked a cigarette and realized that he seemed to have injected too many emotions into the product that he shouldn't have. After smoking a cigarette, he said softly, "I'll send you back in a while." He didn't say much and went straight to the study to smoke. She was like a little wife or a little nanny as she cleaned and washed the dishes. Qin Anlan never knew what it was like to have a woman at home. He had never brought a woman home before, and Yi Liangqiu was the first. After smoking 2 cigarettes in the study, she was already sitting upright and ready to leave. He didn't know why, but he frowned and didn't like it. When he went out, he was obviously in a bad mood. Even the hidden reporters didn't notice him. He turned the steering wheel and asked Yi Liangqiu softly, "Why did you open the window?" "The air conditioner is blowing, and I'm a little dizzy," she said softly. After a pause, she continued, "President Qin, thank you." Their relationship seemed to have returned to being polite. Everything in the apartment was like an illusion. Qin Anlan just smiled and didn't say much. After driving her to Hepping Road, he would drive away. Yi Liangqiu watched as the black sports car slowly drove away, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. They were still photographed. The next day, the headlines were Qin Anlan and Yi Liangqiu. The reporters took photos of Yi Liangqiu spending the night together in President Qin's luxurious apartment. Yi Liangqiu wore President Qin's shirt when she went out. They were very close. Of course, Yi Liangqiu knew that. She wasn't surprised. When she walked to King Entertainment, she couldn't help being whispered about. She knew in her heart that they were talking about her brilliant seduction methods and whatnot. She didn't care. She only needed to care about what Qin Anlan thought of her. Of course, Mo Xiaoqi was the most infuriated. Although there were people scolding her at the beginning of the video, after it was proven that it was Yi Liangqiu in the video, more people were mocking her for actually losing to a newcomer. How could Mo Xiaoqi take this lying down? In the changing room, Mo Xiaoqi blocked Yi Liangqiu's path. She glared at Yi Liangqiu and asked coldly, "You did it, didn't you?" Yi Liangqiu had changed into her dance outfit, and her voice was very calm. "What do you mean I did it?" Chapter 1224. Yi Liangqiu looked at her and chuckled after a long while. Sister Mo, you might be overthinking it. Mo Xiaoqi raised her hand out of habit. This time, Yi Liangqiu reached out and grabbed her arm. Her expression was cold. Yes, I did it. But did I specify that it was Mo Xiaoqi? Sister Mo, no one said anything. You were the one who did it. Mo Xiaoqi had very few people in King Entertainment who would stand up to her like this. She was furious and exasperated. Liang Quan, her manager, was outside and sighed slightly. Didn't this little ancestor see the headlines? Yi Liangqiu had already slept in President Qin's house. Even if their relationship was fake, it would become real sooner or later. Couldn't she just calm down a little? She wanted to be frozen after causing such a ruckus. Liang Quan lowered his voice. Miss Yi is young. Don't lower yourself to her level. This was giving Mo Xiaoqi a way out. But Mo Xiaoqi was not satisfied. She wasn't smart enough to understand Liang Quan's good intentions. She continued to lash out at Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu, you did it. Then don't be afraid to admit it in front of President Qin. President Qin knows, Yi Liangqiu said coldly. Mo Xiaoqi was stunned. Then, she mumbled, that's absolutely impossible. She had been in King Entertainment for a few years. She knew a little about President Qin's style of doing things. He would never let Yi Liangqiu get away with it. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Mo Xiaoqi couldn't take this blow. She was in a daze for a long time. In the end, she was taken away by Liang Quan. Liang Quan looked deeply at Yi Liangqiu and left with Mo Xiaoqi. As soon as they left, Ying Jie appeared. She frowned as she looked in the direction they left. Then, she said to Yi Liangqiu, your opponent was never Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu understood what Ying Jie meant and nodded. I'll be careful in the future. She understood immediately. Ying Jie did not blame her too much. She's still considered popular now, so don't clash with her if you can. Mo Xiaoqi isn't scary, but the fans behind her are extremely scary. After saying that, he changed the topic, go train. From today onwards, I will train you alone. From body shape to etiquette to acting, there will be a special teacher to teach you. After saying that, Ying Jie looked at Yi Liangqiu. Recently, why do I feel that you have put on weight? One had to know that apart from their innate beauty, female artists also had to maintain their figures. Therefore, Ying Jie was a little harsh on this aspect. She could even tell that Yi Liangqiu had grown a lot. Yi Liangqiu was also stunned for a moment. Then, she looked at Ying Jie and pursed her lips. Ying Jie, did I? Maybe I saw wrongly. Ying Jie smiled. Go. President Qin has to check it in the afternoon. Speaking of this, Ying Jie couldn't help but look at Yi Liangqiu in a different light. Only Wan Yun from a few years ago could make President Qin pay attention to her. Yi Liangqiu hummed in acknowledgement and practiced from morning to night. She was still practicing even when her legs were cramping. When Qin Anlan came in, he saw her sweating profusely. He frowned and his heart skipped a beat. In fact, he had long known that interns in the company were tough and he was used to it. But this was the first time he felt uncomfortable. He even had a feeling that Yi Liangqiu's talent was enough for her to not have to work so hard. Yi Liangqiu looked up and saw him. His footsteps came to a halt just like that, and he almost fell. Chapter 1225. He danced extremely well, spinning her around and dancing, one after another, until she could no longer move. At the last movement, he tightened his arms and she fell into his embrace. She gasped softly, but his gaze was locked on her as his lips curled into a faint smile. You danced well. His arms were holding her tightly, so she could only let him hug her. She could only let him tighten his arms. She could only look at his handsome face, and a part of her heart started to collapse. It was quietly falling into a trap that they didn't know about. She was like that, but wasn't he the same as well? Ying Jie looked at them as well. Somehow, She felt that President Qin's gaze was a little different. In the end, he finally let go of her and said lightly, "Yi Liangqiu, go take a shower." "What?" She was stunned for a moment. Qin Anlan smiled. "Go cook." He held the car keys in his hand as he said in a dignified manner, "My hourly helper is on leave, so you'll be making my meals for the time being." He had seen the headlines today, and it was written by her. He knew it with one look. Even if she liked to be caught in the news, he didn't mind. At this moment, Qin Anlan did not realize that if someone else was scheming against him, would he be so forgiving? He seemed to be especially looking forward to her scheming, just like an adult watching what tricks a child would play in the next second. Yi Liangqiu nodded her head and went to take a shower. Ying Jie crossed her arms in front of her chest and looked at her boss. "Have you taken a liking to her?" When she said liking, it didn't mean that she wanted to sleep with him, but that she liked him. Qin Anlan looked at Ying Jie indifferently and said slowly, "It's not like you don't know about this industry. If she wasn't my girlfriend, what do you think she would face with her looks?" Of course, Ying Jie knew about the unspoken rules. "President Qin, haven't you also slept with young ladies before? You're acting so noble now. Also, President Qin, when have you ever felt sorry for your female artists being stalked?" Ying Jie didn't think much of it, but she showed a faint smile on her face. "Thank you, President Qin." The corners of Qin Anlan's mouth slowly rose. She cooks well. Moreover, shouldn't she pay a price for using him? Just then, Yi Liangqiu came out. Qin Anlan naturally held her hand. "Let's go." Yi Liangqiu gave Ying Jie an expression, meaning that she would leave first. Ying Jie stood still and shook her head. What was going on? She knew they were acting, but who were they acting for? The reporters were squatting downstairs. It was normal for a man and a woman to be attracted to each other since they were both in their prime age. It was understandable that Yi Liangqiu was young and inexperienced, so it was understandable that she couldn't figure it out. However, President Qin was an experienced man, so it was a little strange that he was so slow when it came to this kind of relationship. Ying Jie coldly smoked a cigarette. She had a feeling that Liangqiu would definitely capture President Qin's heart. Qin Anlan didn't immediately return to his condominium with Yi Liangqiu. Instead, he took her to the supermarket. He was probably lonely for a long time and wanted someone to accompany him. He pushed the cart with one hand and scrolled through the news on his phone with the other. Yi Liangqiu focused on picking vegetables. She seemed to buy vegetables often, so she was very good at picking. Occasionally, Qin Anlan would also raise his eyes and look at her conflicted expression. At this moment, she was unexpectedly cute. He actually took a picture and posted it on his social media account. "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."